Good evening and welcome to another episode of Jackman Radio. I'm your host, Mike Jackman. As always, I'm joined by Eric Jackman. And we are joined this evening by returning guest, Mr. Vince Palamara, author, researcher, and the preeminent civilian expert on the Secret Service, and the author of the new book, President Kennedy Should Have Survived Death, the Secret Service, and the JFK Assassination, which we're going to get into. Vince, how you doing?
Oh, really good. Yeah, great to be back, Eric and Mike. Thanks a lot for having me. Yeah, lots happened the last year or two, I guess you'd say. Yeah.
Yeah, we were just saying it's been, I think, almost 2 years since the last time you came on, and I think presidential assassinations and assassination attempts are certainly in the zeitgeist and consciousness of Americans right now. Would you say?
Yeah, no doubt. With what happened last summer with then candidate Trump, former President Trump at the time. The ironic thing is, it's a small world. Is that Thomas Crooks is from my hometown of Bethel Park. He's only a few blocks away. And my mom passed away, but when she was in a skilled nursing home, unbeknownst to us, he worked there. So it's like, wow.
Whoa, shit.
Yeah.
Dude, that's got to be some kind of cosmic universe chess piece thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Some other forces at work there, dude.
We couldn't believe we're trying to recover from Bethel Park details about the kid, and they're like, "Wait, he worked at that skilled nursing home too." Jeez, it's like,
my God, that was actually something I wanted to ask you, Vince, because I watched you recently on your recent appearance on America's Untold Stories. Love those guys.
Yeah,
shout out to Hun Lee and Mark Robert. We're all birds of a feather. And that was something I wanted to ask you about, like what kind of parallel, before we dig into JFK specifically, what parallels between Butler and Dealey Plaza, just kind of on the surface, did you observe, and what did your gut tell you when that happened?
My gut told me that something was just off, because the fact in the modern day Secret Service, they train so well for after what happened in Dallas and all the other assassinations and attempts and whatnot through the decades, and they had a counter assault team on a sloped roof, cat-a-corner to where this Thomas Crooks is. And yet he was able to come within, the official story is within like a gnat's eyelash, whatnot, of killing Trump, blowing him away, literally. Assault weapon. What really bothered me was that all the iPhone videos, and you can put them in real time, and people are shouting, "There's someone on the roof. Here's a rifle. There's someone there." You can hear in real time Trump talking, so you can code it. And all these civilians were saying, "Look, look, look." And yet nobody was able to get in there with an AR-15 assault weapon. But none of the police and Secret Service, none of the state and local, nobody was reacting until he was able to get off a shot. Then they take him out. It's very disturbing this day and age. Now, this would have been like, 1975, 1985, okay, but in 2024 to 2025, it was very disturbing. And again, I'll just say I'm not a fan of Trump, but huge but. I don't want any harm happening to him or anybody else. They're still elected officials, still
right. We don't want
just with ballots, not bullets.
Right.
So yeah, it's just the big thing is, to make a long story short, it was just aghast that it was really a fluke that Trump wasn't killed. It wasn't the protection. Yeah, they took him out afterwards. That was a big deal. Oh, yeah, I should say one thing. One big thing is they try to make a big deal about the fact, well, Thomas Crooks, he was on a sloped roof. Meantime, part of the White House is a sloped roof. The counter assault team was on a sloped roof.
Yeah.
So what's the big deal? That female Secret Service director was a piece of work, just like the one 10 years ago when that guy jumped the fence and with a knife got within, like, inside the White House, and actually was taken up by a Secret Service inside. How he was able to do that? It just, the propaganda and the group speaking and the things they say after the fact just don't make any sense. So
yeah, it doesn't add up. And Mike and I, of course, were asked, like, day of, what happened? What do you think happened? And I'm like, we gotta let the dust settle on this. I'm still trying to figure out who was shooting at Kennedy and Dealey Plaza. Okay, and What was surreal for me is I've worked in and out of politics for the last 20 years, and I don't know if Mike has told you, I actually worked in RFK's presidential campaign, and
RFK Jr.
I figured that. Yeah, you're not that old. Wow. Yeah.
Junior, as Trump calls him, and so I was his New Hampshire state coordinator and an advisor to Bobby, and got to know him really well. I consider him a friend. And one of the most surreal things for working on that campaign is I was the point person and lead organizer of his peace speech that he did at St. Anselm College in New Hampshire, which was essentially an homage to his uncle's peace speech at American University.
American University, yeah.
And part of that was coordinating with campus security, the local police, Bobby's private security team. And it was serious, man. Like, there wasn't any Secret Service involved. Obviously, that was a big thing with Bobby's campaign, which was very shameful. How he didn't get it up until it took Butler to happen, and then even Trump was like, look, we got to get Bobby Kennedy Secret Service. Everyone should get it, And finally, Biden and his team relented, and New York has granted him it. It was all politics, my opinion of it, anyways. But when I saw Butler happen, I thought back to some of the events that I did for Bobby and then with him, and his team was so thorough. And to me, even the private security team would not have let that roof gone unsecured at Butler. Like, I know for a fact the people that I worked with were on the ball about all that stuff. Everywhere was considered for the safety of the people at the events, and of course the candidate. Well, of course, with the history Bobby had with his obviously father and uncle. Yeah. So it's still, man. I don't know what to make of it. Like,
Well, the fact that he was this Thomas Crooks, the potential assassin of Trump. He was also noticed by the magnetometers, and he had like hunting glasses on as well. And so he was noticed by other people in law enforcement by the magnetometers.
Sight finder too.
Yeah. And just the fact he was able to get on the roof and everyone's shouting, it's just amazing in this day and age. Like, nothing's infallible. I know there's no perfect 100% protection, this, that, and the other. But that is just an egregious. I just don't get it. I really don't. I was really amazed when I heard about it.
The thing to me, too, I just saw a clip of Trump being interviewed like this week. I think during his Middle East trip. It was either this week or last week. And they brought up the assassination attempt and Crooks specifically. And the interviewer said, like, you're the president now. Like, what can you tell us about that? Nobody would want him to get down to the bottom of this and know more about it than you. And he was like, well, I trust my people, and they're really good people, and they tell me it's all good. So,
well, you sound just like them.
Thank you, Vince. I appreciate that. And you can vote for me in 28 because I am going to run again. I am going to win. But,
but he does this thing with his hands. Oh, yeah.
I am good. I'm going to win Pennsylvania even bigger than I won it last time. Okay.
Wow. Well, that's great. Hey, you're frozen for a second here.
You think you froze up, Mike? Can you still hear us? I think I still have internet. You can hear me, Vince, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. I still have internet.
It's coming back. Sorry, guys.
There you go. You're perfect. Yeah, it was funny. You were frozen in a Trump kind of pose for a little bit. That was good. You're good.
My internet just cut out. I apologize for that, everybody. But
technical difficulty happens. Yeah.
Yeah, we're in the foothills of New Hampshire. But I was saying, so, he was asked about it, and I feel like obviously as president, all the presidents are privy to information that the rest of us, of course, are not, and that makes sense, and sometimes we're frustrated about it, but I just feel like they cremated Crooks like 2 or 3 days later, and then they were up there washing the blood off of the roof, and we don't know if did a shot hit his weapon, then it hit him, and then how long were they looking at him? Like, there's just so many. There's not even official narrative, it feels like to me, Vince, about this.
They blocked his street off for a long time, and then all of a sudden they all went away. The whole thing just doesn't make sense. I mean, in one respect, it seemed like he approved of Trump, like he supported Trump. The family did. And yet he does what he does, and then supposedly he was against Biden as well. But the thing is, like, you're right. After the smoke cleared, it's like you don't hear anything about him anymore. The shooter, Thomas Crooks, kind of just went away after like an intense week or two afterwards. That was it.
It's been 10 months now, and I was saying to Eric as a joke, he feels like a 3D printed Patsy. He's like a 3D printed impossible Patsy, just put together by this amalgamation. And he had a bunch of phones, supposedly. He had foreign contacts, supposedly. And and like you said there about how maybe he gave money to a Republican thing or a Democrat. Like, there's, depending on who's talking about him and what their agenda is, they're going to say he was left or he was right, which is, to me, a parallel to Oswald trying to shape him as a commie.
Exactly.
Or trying to shape him.
Anti-Castro. Yeah, you're right.
So I feel like that can be manipulated any way they want it to. But it's just it's crazy to me, even with phones and everything, all the technology we have now, that we still know so little about what happened just 10 months ago. So
It's
I don't know.
it's humbling. You're right. You were
And
right.
and you were able to include some of that on not this book, but the prior book you did, right? When
Yeah,
you talked
yeah.
about the Chicago plot.
Yeah, plot to kill President Kennedy. There's a few pages on the Trump attempt in there. So it actually is the first book to ever mention the Trump assassination. So how about that?
Wow.
Yeah, Trump assassination attempt, I should say.
So
Yeah.
before we get into Dallas and what the Secret Service did or may not have done or should have done in Dallas, the Chicago plot to me is very important to point out to people, because this is something that could have happened on, I think, November 2nd, around 3 weeks before Dealey Plaza in Dallas.
Right.
What's your overall thesis and idea about Chicago and what happened and what was in the works?
Well, I know for a long time you still get today like some lone nutters. I don't want to mention them. Basically say, "Oh, it all hangs on Abraham Bolden." Oh, he's the first African American agent of the Secret Service White House detail. And after like a 30-day trial at the White House, on his own volition, it wasn't like he didn't pass muster. He basically went back to the Chicago office and he served from Eisenhower, Kennedy, and Johnson. And whenever Kennedy came to Chicago, as documents have come out, Abraham Bolden's part of the security detail, March 23rd, 1963, and the November 2nd canceled trip. Okay, and my whole thing about this is the reason why I wrote a book on the Chicago plot was that I found information that corroborates Abraham Bolden. And there's also some misconceptions I cleared up as well. The big thing, I think one of the biggest things is a gentleman by the name of George McNally, a former Secret Service agent who later became the head of the White House Communication Agency, or WICA. They were on all the presidential motorcades. Well, he was in the Secret Service from FDR to Truman, and then he was part of the WICA from Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, and to Nixon. He was on all the motorcades. He says something amazing in his book. His book was called A Million Miles of Presidents. Just to say, just very quickly, George McNally died in 1970, but his widow came out with his unpublished manuscript in 1982. Very small publisher, like Andy Warnarczyk, the last Raw Bookshop had it. Researchers know about it. It's still obscure. Right in the book, George McNally talks about this March 23rd, 1963 trip to Chicago, which was the major trip before the one that was canceled November 2nd. He says the police got word of Puerto Rican snipers. So Puerto Rican snipers, plural. It'd be bad enough if it was Puerto Rican sniper singular, but Puerto Rican snipers. Helicopters searched the roofs of the buildings, but no threats materialized. So you got a two-part thing there. Wow, helicopters searching the roofs of buildings. People have a tendency to think that, building rooftops were only guarded as a result of the assassination. But I found evidence since a couple of my books, including the latest one, that building rooftops were guarded either by Secret Service, military, police, or someone's of all three, sometimes even with a police helicopter from FDR, Truman, Eisenhower, and the Kennedy days. It was very common for building rooftops to be guarded. But back to the Chicago plot. To me, that's a smoking gun of an attempt on Kennedy's life. Police, it wasn't some sort of like rumor out of nowhere. It was the police got wind of this to the point where this guy's writing in his book about this. He's a former Secret Service agent. And it's like I said, the next trip, Abraham Bolden talks about there were Cubans and two of them got away. Now, here's the thing now about Abraham Bolden. It's pretty amazing. In the late 1990s, the Assassination Records Review Board, that was the federal body that got together in result of the Stone movie JFK, where thousands, millions of people wrote to their congressmen, senators, and demanded the files be released. Was a federal board was put together, Doug Horn famously being on there. Now, he wasn't a board member. He was part of the ARB. They released millions of documents. In that, we found out that the ARB did some unofficial investigating. And one of the things they did was to try to corroborate or maybe even debunk Abraham Bolden. They contacted the then current Secret Service, 1997 Clinton era. Well, I'm shocked that these documents didn't get greater play. According to the stamps in the documents, they came out in 2009. Everybody knows about the document releases in 2017 to 2025. Well, it says on the side 2009, but I didn't discover them till like 2016. But beyond all that, the bottom line, what do these say? What these say is not only was Abraham Bolden part of the security of the planning of this November 2nd trip, but he also investigated Puerto Rican persons of interest. That's what I mentioned in my 6th book about the plot to kill President Kennedy. So a lot of times people, and rightly so, focus on pro and anti-Castro Cubans as being possibly involved in assassination plots or successful or otherwise against Kennedy. Well, he's mentioning Puerto Rican subjects. And it turns out 2 of these subjects were part of, it's not very well known now, it's very well known in the 50s, 60s, into the 70s before it faded away. I think in 1954, Puerto Rican nationalists tried to assassinate congressmen at the U.S. Capitol with pistols. They actually were in the galley and shot down and tried to kill some of our people. So that happened. And 2 of these people that served time in federal prison got out. And Abraham Bolden was investigating them at the time of the planning of the Chicago trip. Now, there's 50 states in the Union, Lord knows how many cities. And why, of all people, is Abraham Bolden investigating Puerto Rican nationalists, and 2 of them were involved in this assassination? People might know, November 1st, 1950, 2 Puerto Rican nationalists tried to assassinate Truman. 2, that's a conspiracy. And ironically, some of the future JFK-era Secret Service agents were involved in the protection of Truman. But the bottom line is we have a tendency, and rightfully so, to focus on pro and anti-Castro Cubans. Well, could it be that there were maybe Puerto Rican nationalists involved in this? But again, just to answer your question directly, yeah, that's just 2 major areas I discovered in my book that corroborate Bolden. And another thing, too, people have a tendency to look at the 1975 Edwin Black article about the plot to kill President Kennedy. They always try to hang it on, oh, that's his Bolden. His source is Bolden. It's like, did people read the article?
It's a great article.
He interviews
50 years later.
Yeah, Thomas Cole of the FBI is interviewed. And what Thomas Cole says, some people were picked up. You have to get the rest from the Secret Service. But this FBI agent is telling Edwin Black in 1975, some people were picked up. You have to get the rest from the Secret Service. But what happens is people's zeal to say, oh, this was all just Bolden, they don't realize other people were interviewed for this article. And if you just read it, Thomas Cole right there, it's another smoking gun. Some people were picked up for the Chicago plot, huh? And Edwin Black interviewed Thomas Arthur Valley, what many people think is the patsy for Chicago, the way Lee Harvey Oswald 3 weeks later was the patsy in Dallas. First thing Thomas Arthur Valley said to them in 1975 is, Soldiers Field, the plot to kill President Kennedy. He admitted he trained anti-Castro Cubans against Kennedy as part of the CIA program, and many people believe Oswald did the same thing. We were stationed at Sugi, but he was stationed in Camp Atsu was Thomas Arthur Valley. But more importantly, they both had CIA connections. But again, that's what I bring out. I bring out more details. A former Chicago Secret Service agent, Nemo Ciochina, was adamant there was a conspiracy in Chicago. And here's the big thing. This came out in 1993, and it's in my first book. The head of the Chicago office, Maurice Martineau, who was Abraham Bolden's boss and not a fan of Bolden, by the way, he told me that he definitely believed there was a conspiracy. He believes the work of the House Select Committee was much better than the Warren Commission. When I wanted some details as well, I'd rather keep the details to myself. But the bottom line here, in 1993, I'm a stranger on the phone. Here's the head of the Chicago office who spent time in the White House detail, basically from FDR to Eisenhower, off and on. But he was the head of the Chicago office. And he's telling me this, as opposed to get a life, it was just Oswald. So again, you've got 3 people in the Chicago office that believe there was a plot to kill Kennedy. And then you got the corroboration with Abraham Bolden. You have the canceled trip. Now, the official story, Eric and Mike, is that, Kennedy, well, actually, there's 2 official stories. Kennedy had a cold, and the other one is, it was the day before that President Diem and his brother New were killed in a CIA-backed coup in Vietnam. But Pierre Salinger, JFK's press secretary, said, no. President Kennedy's still going to go forth for this trip, and we're going to have a state-of-the-art communication center in the bleachers at Soldiers Field. Now, I want to say something. Some people out there might say, hey, Vince, you confusing the Cuban Missile Crisis with Chicago trip and this? No. The story some agents were told is Kennedy had a cold, and it was a similar alibi the year before during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Kennedy was in Chicago, October of 1962, and told people, I have a cold. We got to get back to Washington. That's when Pierre Salinger, ironically, same guy, said to the plane, Mr. President, you don't have a cold. I'll tell you when we get to Washington. Well, here we are, and there was 2 cover stories. Again, the day before, President Diem and his brother New were killed in a CIA-backed coup. But again, Pierre Salinger debunked that. So, and this trip is amazing because not only do you have Thomas Arthur Valley, who was set up as the patsy, basically, he was the fall guy in case something happened, in my opinion. But you had a building that looked remarkably like a book depository. It was just higher and longer, and they had come to a same bizarre, that 90-degree turn and all that other jazz they did in Dallas. They were going to do the same thing in Chicago. So I think the Chicago. Well, there was other plots too, and that's what I also. It's called The Plot to Kill President Kennedy in Chicago. But I have one chapter that deals with all these threats and plots to Kennedy, all from 61 to 63, and it's amazing. You see these newspaper articles. I had to pay money, newspaperarchives.com, for these things. And there's be Baltimore, Maryland article, guy planned to blow away Kennedy when he went through the tunnel. All these things. So people have a tendency to think that everything was hunky-dory with Kennedy until he gets to Dallas, when you realize, my God, from 61 to 63, the Secret Service was getting all these mortal threats to the man's life, and not just Miami and not to Chicago, but other trips too. So it really paints a bad picture of the Secret Service, because sometimes people have a tendency to say, oh, Vince, they didn't have the experience. The Secret Service, the assassination was their training ground. And you realize, no. Not only was the attempt on Truman in 1950, he had all these prior threats that they were very much aware of, because people were arrested, people were investigated. So there you go. So,
wasn't there one out in California at a theater or something where Kennedy was going to be killed?
Yeah, that's Los Angeles. I think Vaughn Marlowe was the principal suspect in that. I know that author Dick Russell, who wrote The Man Who Knew Too Much About Richard Case Nagel. He devotes several pages to that. Yeah, and that was a 1962 era plot. And a couple of months after that, when Kennedy goes to the Orange Bowl to greet the released Bay of Pigs Cubans and whatnot.
Oh yeah,
there was a plot. Dynamite was found on the side of the road during the motorcade to the Orange Bowl. Yeah, and this was in 2 Secret Service reports after the fact, and they talk about matter of factly that they found this dynamite. And it was obviously targeted towards Kennedy. It's more grist the mill. It's hard. It's strange credulity. The one man got lucky in November 22nd, okay? And yet there was all these prior threats and plots to kill Kennedy in the 3 years previously, from election night up to including. And we're supposed to believe, and at the same time, the Secret Service security was stripped noticeably. If you compare Tampa, Florida, 4 days before Dallas to Dallas, it's just unbelievable, the contrast. We can get into that if you want.
And what I love what you do in your book here, I think I would say your central thesis in this book, which I really appreciate, because, I've been looking at this for 25 years, since I was in my teens. And one thing I always notice on the History Channel interviews or anything you would see with Secret Service or this person or that person was almost like they're blaming Kennedy for getting himself shot, because he had Irish fatalism and he knew that he could catch a bullet at any time, which, obviously you're president. That's got to be in the back of your mind. And then this thing, like, he wanted the bubble top off and he ordered the agents off the car. So I really like how you just totally shatter that myth. So
I appreciate
go into that a little bit, Vince, because I think that's so important that lie and that myth not be allowed, because that's a particularly vulgar one, I feel.
I appreciate it. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and it was a fluke how it all happened. There's an old lawyer's adage: don't ask a question you don't know the answer to. I went into things blindly without an agenda. I always tell people, these agents I spoke to on the phone in the early 90s onward, they could have rained on my parade. They could have been lying to me even and said, oh, yeah, President Kennedy, he orders off the car. They could have all said that. And wow, no books for Vince. It's time to move on with your life's work. Now, I definitely believe, just based on the Zapruder film, Kennedy should live, the Greer slowed the vehicle down. We'll get into that later and whatnot. So there's some other things. But the thing is, I begrudgingly, up to like 1992, I begrudgingly believed some of the pablum about President Kennedy, because I had nothing to counter it with. And I always say, now, David Lifton's big moment in the case was when he got the Cyber report about surgery of the head area. My big coming out party, so to speak, was September 27th, 1992. I phoned the head of the White House detail, Gerald Bain, B-E-H-N, not to be confused with Gerald Blaine, B-L-A-I-N-E, of the Kennedy detail fame, was just a little private, but this is the head of the White House detail. So I'm basically, keep in mind, I read William Manchester's book, Death of the President. I read The Day Kennedy Was Shot by Jim Bishop. I read the Warren Report and saw articles, whatnot, and they try to say Kennedy didn't want this done, didn't want that done. So even though there was a handicap to my research, I still believe, Greer would have, hit the gas if they would have did better planning. So make a long story short, when I was interviewing Mr. Bain, nice enough gentleman, I said, yeah, I've read some books and I understand that, President Kennedy had ordered the agents off the limousine. He cut me off. He says, I don't remember Kennedy ever saying anything about not having agents on the back of the car. If you look at the newsreels, you'll see agents on there. I got cotton mouthed. I immediately it's like my tongue was almost sticking to the roof of my mouth. I couldn't believe it. My face was getting red. I couldn't believe that this guy said this. Thank God I got him on tape too. By the way, and some people wonder, some of these agents I was able to tape, and some of them agreed to be taped. And thank God I did. 6 months later, the guy dies of cancer. But he's the number one agent. Tell me this now. What happened? I was very excited, blown away by what he had to say. He said some other things amazing too. Just very briefly, he confirmed the motorcade route was changed to Dallas. He said the House Select Committee asked him an executive session. Executive session testimony has never been released, only a staff interview. And he was asked why the motorcade route was changed in Dallas. He said, I know it was changed, but why? I've forgotten completely. I don't know. But now so I had two things on my mind. Well, when I got off the phone, I started thinking again, like a defense attorney. Maybe it's all those lone nutters and people working on me through the years. I always think about the other side. And I say to myself, okay, this is the number one agent, but come on, Vince, get corroboration, because when the dust settles, he is still this one man. He was very lucid. He remembered tremendous details, sounded very, very, he sounded like 56, not 76.
Wow.
But so what I did is I, again, went blind to this. I started contacting, again, keep in mind, this is when the internet was in its infancy. There was bulletin boards. And most people didn't even know what the internet was in 1992. Let's face it. I'm calling these people blindly all over the place. Cold call.
Phone books, directory,
There you go. Yeah, all that stuff.
Some referrals, though, too, right, Vince? Some of them would give you other agents' numbers and names.
That's
right?
exactly what happened. They would say, Bob Lilly. Hey, he lives in Niceville, Florida. Another agent would tell, and I'd be like, oh, my God, pinch me, I'm dreaming. Now, how about Lynn Meredith? Do you know where he lives? Yes, Vince, here's his address and stuff, and here's his phone number. And that.
Wow.
And what happened was, this was really what began my first book and all my research. Not only just what Gerald Bain told me when they all started to say the same things like they were reading Q card. His number 2 assistant, Floyd Boring, who ended up being the planner of the Texas trip, he actually was the planner of all Kennedy's advance work. He admitted as such in 2 oral histories, one for the Truman Library, one for the JFK Library, and even Jim Bishop somehow knew that he was the planner of the Texas trip was in the, quote, capable hands of Floyd Boring. Well, all these agents were all telling me the same thing. President Kennedy was a very nice man, never interfered with our actions at all, never ordered them off the car. That's hogwash. That's baloney. Rufus Youngblood even threw in an expletive. Don't believe what you read. That's so not true. He wasn't like that at all. Another agent told me, presidents, they have other things to think about. They're trying to memorize their speech. You're thinking about world events. The last thing you're thinking about is, I wonder if Joe Jones is on the back of a car. They trust the Secret Service sometimes with their downfall. But what happened was I realized, my God, so wait a minute. These agents tell me, they realized that it's actually the Secret Service in 1964, the Warren Commission, was blaming Kennedy. What happened was they were trying to say, keep in mind, 63, 64, photos of the Tampa trips basically didn't exist. They weren't released. They weren't around. So what happened was, and Kennedy was dead. They released 5 reports 6 months later, only because the Warren Commission asked. And they tried to say that Kennedy in Tampa had said, ordered the agents off the car. They didn't say anything about the Dallas trip, but it was inferred because of Tampa, they didn't ride there in Dallas. Now, Clint Hill took great pains in his Secret Service report, one of the 5, to say, I was never told personally by President Kennedy. I heard it from the administrative offices of the Secret Service, but he said twice, I can't remember who told me. Under oath to our inspector, he admitted who told him. So it was Floyd Boring. It was between November 19th and November 21st. I believe he told all the agents about not riding on the back of the car. And when you have Gerald Bain and Floyd Boring denying, categorically denying, not even with any wiggle room, that Kennedy ever said anything like this whatsoever. And I interviewed Floyd Boring 3 times. I also got a letter from him too. And his JFK Library oral history, he says of all the presidents he served, from FDR to LBJ, JFK and his staff was the most cooperative of all of them by far. But the point is, now you got 2 point things. You got history has lied, saying Kennedy had a rendezvous with death and he didn't want agents by the car and all that stuff. You feel it's not true. But then you have the Secret Service blaming him after the fact. I said, my God, this is a story. This is something else. And I just found out other things. For years, Kennedy didn't want the bubble top on it. It took years for these photos and films to come out. It's really in the last 5 to 15 years, a lot of photos and films have been digitally remastered, released. The photographers have died. Thank God for Pinterest. You might say, Pinterest, what's that to do anything? Well, now so many copyrighted films and photos are available, where before there'd be copyright strikes, things you couldn't post. There used to be a time in Facebook, you can only post your photos and nobody else's. Now there's such loose copyright laws, and so many of the photographers are dead, like Cecil Stoughton, the White House photographer, and Robert Knudsen, the other one. So, make a long story short for your viewers and listeners, all this stuff has been released now, but it's for decades. All we had was the inaugural motorcade and the one in Dallas, and next to nothing in between. And so, when I started to see, for example, the Tampa trip, I said, "My God, all the films and photos I'm seeing, there's agents on the back of the car." Then I find out years later, obviously, it was a 28-mile motorcade. It was Kennedy's longest domestic motorcade. Dallas was only 10 miles long. And yet Tampa was almost 3 times as long, and agents were on the back of the car the whole time. But yet, if you read the books back then, you think to yourself, well, Kennedy ordered them off the car. They shouldn't be in the pictures for the most of the trip because he called them off, not realizing there's ever going to be some pipsqueak decades later looking at the photos and go, wait. Because keep in mind, in the 60s, there was no internet. There was no investigative journalism before Woodward and Bernstein, but before people questioned their government till Mark Lane and Weisberg and whatnot. And even then, resources were so archaic, dredging microfiche. All these officials wouldn't ever talk to me back then. They were active agents. A lot of these people were active agents up to the High Select Committee era 15 years later. They want to talk to me. Wow. So it took them in retirement when they were getting their government pensions. Everything was safe. They're citizens. They can now say what they said. And what happened was I realized, well, when I interviewed Sam Kinney, the driver of the follow-up car, he's saying, I am solely responsible for the bubble top being off the car. It's one of my 30-year regrets. I interviewed him 3 times between 1992 and 1994. He said, I've always regretted it. I said, did Kennedy have anything to do with the bubble top? I said, no, absolutely not. Then I said, what about Kenny O'Donnell? I said, no, he had nothing. It was my sole responsibility. I've had to live with that decision. But you read the books and you find that Kennedy supposedly didn't want that bubble top on. Yeah. Again, Mike and Eric, it wasn't until the last 5 to 15 years. If anybody goes to my YouTube channel, I have a 2.5-hour long video I compiled of every known photo and video of all Kennedy's motorcades, 61.
Amazing.
And I found out, see, keep in mind, Kennedy only went in a finite number of motorcades. He wasn't in a motorcade every day or even every week. Right. He usually made an average of like 2 to 3 a month, domestic and foreign. Well, on between 1/3 and 1/2 of all Kennedy's motorcades, he had the bubble top. The vast majority of the time, the weather was fine. He has an ear-to-ear grin, and yet the problem is, Kennedy didn't like that bubble top. He only used it when it was raining. Total bunk. In fact, Robert Lilly, an agent I spoke to, says, yeah, during the South America tour, we went to Puerto Rico, Venezuela, Caracas, when Roy Kellerman and I rode on the back of the car. It was great weather. We were going 50 miles an hour to the presidential palace at one point with a bubble top on. I'm like, oh, really? And then I find pictures of Mexico. Clint Hill's running beside the car. Jackie and Jack are in the car with the bubble top on. Beautiful sunshine day.
Nice weather.
But see, the myth is they threw this on because you know what it is? His favorite poem is I have a rendezvous with death. We all have a rendezvous with death. None of us are immortal. Debunk that. Number 2, they try to say that, he was reckless in his personal life. There's been some exaggeration, but he was. But the other thing you say is reckless in his security. No. The other major myth I debunk is most people would think, well, it's the president who has the last word when it comes to his security. Presidents Truman, Johnson, and Clinton are all on record saying the Secret Service is the only boss the President of the United States had. In fact, when James Browley heard what Truman said, he agreed. And more importantly than all that, because you could say that's anecdotal, even though it's still amazing because it comes from the presidents, there's an Associated Press article that came out in November 1563. What's that? 7 days before the assassination says. It was serialized in all these articles. It says the Secret Service can overrule even the president when it comes to security. Shoot up to the year 2010, Clint Hill and Gerald Blaine, the authors, Gerald Blaine of the Kennedy detail fame, they're sitting at the 6th Floor Museum. Again, 2010, it's being videotaped, and Clint Hill says, well, the president can tell you what he wants done, but that doesn't mean you have to do it. In fact, what we always used to do is agree with the president, and we do what we felt was best anyway.
Right.
I have that clip, a bootleg of it on my YouTube channel. I played that over and over again and couldn't believe my eyes and ears. I said to myself, is he doing this for history's sake, for posterity? Because their books go against that. And I realized what it is the official, what they had to do is they had to take the onus off them, because whether Oswald acted alone or not, there's a conspiracy or not, the Secret Service screwed up big time. And they're the men who killed Kennedy, because if they would have did their job, Kennedy lived. So what they had to do is they had to say one man did it and another man, the victim, helped. They blame the victim. For example, Bill Greer, the driver of the car, we'll get into him in a second, but his big thing, he was so remorseful that day. Kenny O'Donnell and Dave Powers said in their book, Dave Powers said that Charles Carlton CBS video that Bill Greer was so remorseful, so bad. Yet by the time they get to the night of the autopsy, he's talking to the FBI agents for an interview. He says, sometimes the president told us to slow down. See, laying that blame thing.
Right.
Again, it's all
getting in front of it.
Yep. And so, and other things too, Kennedy was blamed for the motorcycles not being beside the car. Total bunk. Kennedy had nothing to do with motorcycles beside the car. In fact, the House Select Committee even said it was uniquely insecure not having the motorcycles beside the car like they normally did. This is none of the prior stops in San Antonio, Houston, Fort Worth. You see the pictures of San Antonio. There's such a phalanx of motorcycles. It's ridiculous. It looks like there's 30 in the photo. He gets to Dallas. The Secret Service was from 8 motorcycles down to 4. So 8 to 4, and added insult to injury, they're moved behind the rear wheels, making them totally useless. There's no coverage whatsoever, and also gets professional armed eye-near witnesses out of the way too.
Didn't they have a meeting the night before in Dallas, Vince, to talk about what the Dallas police and what the formation would be with the motorcycle cops, and it was totally different,
right? It was totally
what it usually was.
Yeah, and what it was is there's actually a document that survives. I have it in a couple of my books. It's dated November 21st, Dallas Police, and they actually outlined the specific Dallas Police motorcycle outriders are going to be. There's a total of 8 all around the car. One of them's Marion Baker, ironically, who later on ran into the book depositor, had the supposedly infamous meeting with Lee Harvey Oswald in the lunchroom when Oswald has the coke. But more importantly, that's as important really, but he's relegated to way in the back behind the press bus. And when I got a little short letter from Marion Baker in 1998, he admits that, there was an order to stay away. In fact, during his Warren Commission testimony, he says, we were told not to ride beside the car. And his other partner, B.J. Martin, said the same thing. We were told not to be beside the car. And that's when the attorney said, I think that's all, officer. Like, didn't expound on that. What did you mean by that? It's like, I think that's all, officer. Like, what? You said something we don't want to hear. Well, in 1992, Jean Hill came out with her book, The Lady in Red. It turned out her boyfriend was B.J. Martin. And B.J. Martin told her in private, it was the damnedest motorcycle escort you ever saw. It talked about how it was limited and people sure got a good view of Kennedy, all right. Because, again, less professional, armed, eye-near witnesses out of the way, it blocks the field of fire from the front and the rear. And if agents were in the back of the car, it blocks the view, and they would have been able to face forward, see any kind of problems. We know Paul Landis was on the follow-up car, and he says the shot came from the front in 2 of his Secret Service reports. But the bottom line, when it comes to the bubble top, motorcycles, and agents being in the back of the car, it's blamed on Kennedy. As much as they could, they tried to blame it. It is throwing this reckless thing. They're always saying reckless. Like Gerald Blaine in his book, The Kennedy Detail. In fact, I'll just back up a little bit. His book came out in 2010. Well, this is what I detail in the new book, President Kennedy Should Survive Dallas. I have a chapter. I show my 22-page letter to Clint Hill. I got his. People got to realize, he had
to sign that. He had to sign off that he got it, right?
And I got his receipt. And what
he
happened?
Clearly read that because he talked to another agent about it at a wedding, right?
Exactly. What happened was, I was just shocked in my life at the time. Back in 2005, I wrote to Lynn Meredith, who was a Secret Service agent who was there from Eisenhower and Kennedy onward, but he protected the Kennedy children, John, and Caroline. Well, out of nowhere, in his letter to me, second letter he wrote back to me, he said, Vince, you're a real student of the Secret Service. I'm going to give you some information that's not readily available. Clint Hill's unlisted address and phone number. I just ask you to be respectful. I was like, my God, other than Mike Wallace and William Manchester and the Warren Commission, no private researchers ever interviewed this guy. Maybe the big reason it was unlisted address and phone number. So I said, you know what? There's only one time to live. I'm going to write this guy a letter, and I'm going to basically a Cliff Notes version of my research.
And this book,
the entire letter's in there.
The whole letter's in here. It's a fucking page turner. Let me tell you.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it,
my friend.
Yeah, basically what it says in the letter, to distill it down to a couple lines, is, sir, I'm sorry what happened to you and the grief you went through, but if it wasn't for your colleagues It was for a couple certain colleagues, I think, were guilty. And if you weren't hamstrung by being ordered to stay away by your colleagues, not having anything to do with Kennedy, because all his colleagues in glorious detail letter adamantly denied that Kennedy ever ordered him off the car or anything else, you would have been able to have a clear conscience because it wasn't your fault, Clint. It wasn't. Although I left out about the drinking incident because I didn't want to get him pissed off, but he was one of the agents that drank the night before.
We'll get into that.
What happened was, I got his signed receipt. Clint Hill got like an autograph, so he definitely got it. Well, later on, he tried to say he didn't get it. Another time, he tried to say he sent it back to me unread, all this bull. But what happened was, I had already spoke to Gerald Blaine, obscure agent. Now, these guys that wrote books, their books weren't even a thought in 2004 and 2005. Well, about 4 days later, I called Gerald Blaine, and out of nowhere, he starts quoting from my letters. Says, you should not be so hard on Emory Roberts. He was a double, even a triple checker. I'm like, what? And he goes, yeah, by the way, Clint Hill, he's been a good friend of mine since we started the Denver office in the late 50s, and I just went to his son Chris's wedding. In fact, me and Bill Livingood, another agent, you might have heard the name. I was like, oh, my God. Did he send it via fax or email? He sent a goddamn letter. What the hell are they sharing the letter for? And when I called Clint Hill famously, he was like, about what? I don't have no interest in talking to you. But the bottom line is, keep this in mind. He shared the letter. He knew about it. Well, then in 2009, I read the trade papers, and they were talking about Gerald Blaine is coming out with a blockbuster book on the Secret Service. I'm like, Gerald Blaine? Only somebody like me even knows who Gerald Blaine was. He was everything Clint Hill wasn't. Clint Hill was very famous. Gerald Blaine, 99% of people on Earth didn't even know who he was, where everyone knows who Clint Hill is, even though you're not even interested. Oh, he's that dude who jumped in the car in the Zapruder film, huh? Well, the bottom line is Gerald Blaine got Simon & Schuster, the biggest book company in the world. He gets a deal with them, a first-time author, an obscure. He had no background whatsoever. And in his book, when you read it, and that's what I critique in this book, is that it's blame the victim like crazy. And he mentions me on 2 pages without actually naming me. He talks about me, self-described Secret Service expert. I guess he was worried I was going to sue him, so he didn't actually name me in the book. But the whole book is basically an excuse to blame Kennedy. He didn't want us on the back of a car. That's why he was killed in Dallas. The president was so reckless. We couldn't understand why he was so reckless. And the big whopper, Eric and Mike, is he claims, and all these agents are dead but him, how convenient. He claims November 25th, 1963, the day of Kennedy's funeral, that there was a meeting of all the agents, and they all said, look, guys, we can't let the world think that Kennedy had something to do with his own death. Meantime, telling the story, everyone's reading the book, is getting the impression that's what you want to convey. Well, again, all the agents are dead save Blaine, and a lot of them were dead years before. More importantly, the ones that I spoke to that later passed away all said stuff categorically in opposition to this meeting. They told me Kennedy had nothing to do with ordering us off the car. It was a very nice man, blah, blah, blah. But the bottom line, he plants this story, and it makes it sound like, wow. So there was a meeting between the agents where they didn't want to blame Kennedy, but Kennedy did order him off the car. Well, I spoke to another agent, Talmadge Bailey, and he said that meeting was horse bleep. There was no meeting. He's making it up. I was like, a fellow agent's telling me Gerald Blaine's full of it, and he's making it up. That what more do I need? But what I found out was there was a security meeting that day because they were going to St. Matthew's Cathedral. Jackie and all the dignitaries, De Gaulle, Haile Selassie, and all them were walking to St. Matthew's Cathedral. Very bold and brave move. That's what the security meeting was about. It had nothing to do, because if there was any truth to this, the other agents I spoke to would have mentioned the security meeting. The security meeting would have been mentioned during Clint Hill's Warren Commission testimony, James Riley's Warren Commission testimony. There would have been documents about it. Well, really is the big whopper is Gerald Blaine, after he castigates me by naming these researchers and experts that only would have read documents that only came out in 1992, they would have found that the Secret Service is doing everything it can not to blame Kennedy. It's like, oh my God, Gerald Blaine. These documents actually came out in 1964. They're in the Warren Commission, Volume 18, the Warren Reports, Volume 18. But he's trying to make it come out in 1992. I guess he didn't realize that I dealt with these reports. And he's trying to, in other words, what he's trying to do for his audience of readers, a lot of people don't read other books. A lot of people just are satisfied. He's a former agent. It's good enough for me. They're not going to do anything. They're going to take his word for it.
Right.
Realizing he's setting up the premise that there was this feeling that Kennedy ordered him out the car and did other things. No truth to it. But basically what it boils down to is after that 22-page letter, Clint Hill and Gerald Blaine went into full action mode. Clint Hill got on C-SPAN. Not only did Clint Hill and Gerald Blaine mention me twice, 2 different times. This was before I was even a published author. I was basically nobody other than people in the research community, which was very weird. Like, why is he mentioning this little unknown guy from Pittsburgh?
Dude, you live rent-free in their heads, dude.
It's really, really bizarre. But guess what Clint Hill admitted, speaking of the year 2005? Gerald Blaine's on record. He began his book in 2005 after I sent the 22-page letter that same year. Clint Hill said he burned all his notes in the C-SPAN CEO, Brian Lamson. When did you burn all your notes? He goes, let me think. This is 2012. That's the year of the interview. So this is 2012. He paused for a while. It was 2005. I burned all my notes. Oh,
wow.
So you burn your notes. Was this right after you read my letter and you freaked out from it because all of a sudden it went to action? In fact, Sam Kinney, one of the agents I spoke to, said that we wear it as a badge of honor. We'd never write a book. Clint Hill, Floyd Boring, I saw other old school guys. We'd never write a book. Well, they got a hold of Lisa McCubbin, who has a background that's pretty bizarre. And all of a sudden, Clint Hill writes 4 books, and he contributed to the Kennedy Detail book, and he did a documentary. And if it wasn't for me, there would have been a major Hollywood movie, and it would have been blaming Kennedy, and people would have saw all these Hollywood stars.
Ooh. Yeah, wasn't it Gyllenhaal's father, Maggie Gyllenhaal, and Jake Gyllenhaal's dad?
Stephen Gyllenhaal, and it was in production. And for a few short weeks there in 2010, yeah. And what happened was I couldn't believe it. The Life of Pi, Academy Award winner, narrator or animator. It's going to be state-of-the-art CGI. And I'm like, this is going to be crazy. Well, this real wonderful lady from the Philippines who knows Stephen Gyllenhaal contacted me out of the blue, and she goes, Vince, I'm a friend of Stephen Gyllenhaal's. I have his email. I want to let you know this script is going to be blaming Kennedy left, right, front, and center. I got a bootleg script through Stephen's friend. Well, here's the thing. I got his private email address, and she says, Vince, I strongly recommend you send your evidence to him like you did with Clint Hill. I did. Within a week or 10, I think it was like 8 days later, the website went down on Internet Movie Database. The production company shut down, and the movie went away. It went away from the trade papers, and I started to get harassed at work and harassed online. Blogs were taken down. Hundreds of my Amazon reviews were taken down. I got called into my human resources department, my old job, twice, where this guy who was a friend of Gerald Blaine, I'm not going to name him for legal reasons, wanted to get me terminated because I was writing unpatriotic things about his friend Gerald Blaine, who was a honorable former Secret Service agent, Korean war vet, and this guy is casting aspersions and all this. I was like, no, here's the thing. Now, the lady at Human Resources laughed. And she said, second time she didn't laugh. This got more serious because the guy did twice because Vince. Freedom of speech, First Amendment rights. You did nothing wrong. Your job's in no jeopardy whatsoever. Well, when he did it a second time, they called me into a conference room again. I'm like, what is going on here? And she says, Vince, we're going to have legal action against him if he writes a third time. This is harassment now. We've told him already to go away. And the CEO, they screen all his mail, good, bad, or indifferent, just in case there's a kook or whatnot. They want to see that written before the CEO gets it. It's like the president. When you used to write a letter, the president would get it. His staff gets it, and they think it's worthy, they'll pass it on. So, long story short, if there's nothing to my research, and Vince, you're amateur, all full of hot air, why would Gerald Blaine be sending his letter? His lawyer sent me a threatening letter in 2009. That's insane. I got harassed at work. I got blogs taken down. And then before you catch your, and I mentioned this all in my latest book. The one thing I will say is, you probably read this too, so you got the Gerald Blaine, Clint Hill writing of the books, and the harassment, and all the tall tales. Well, Carol Leonig, multiple Pulitzer Prize winning author. She came out with, turned out to be a #1 best-selling book, Zero Fail, in 2021, a book about the Secret Service. Well, in the lead up to her book, Zero Fail, I was really looking forward to this. My God, this is going to really help my books. Her book is going to get the publicity. My books, by default, are going to get publicity. Well, within 48 hours of her book coming out, all my books disappeared from Amazon. All disappeared. At the time, I had 5 books. The URLs went away. They all went away. I was freaking out. Like, what's going on here?
Well, like when you search for them, they were all gone?
All gone. And it turned out after I got over the shock and everything, and I'm trying to keep my wits about me to restore these and contact Amazon, I found Josiah Thompson's book, Last Second in Dallas, the one he wrote in 2021, that was gone. Larry Hancock's book, I let them know. They were gone, so I'm contacting Amazon. The most disturbing thing about the Amazon representatives, they all told me, Vincent, we have no idea. We had nothing to do with it. Does it make sense? Why would they kill their own? They want sales. It's all about money. They don't care about what you're saying. Your books, show me the money, show me the sales. Why would they kill their own? Well, the books were restored within 24 hours after the release of her book, after the news media died down. And I think it's not even a paranoia saying to say it's someone out there deleted my books and several other prominent books were coming out at that exact time. I think because they didn't want a runoff of, hey, there's all this massive publicity for Secret Service book. It's also about the assassination. Some of the articles talk about the assassination. And obviously, Vince, you do a search in its Secret Service JFK, and my books all come up. They were all gone. So there's not going to be any collateral sales.
That's whacked.
Palamara. Well, again, my first book came out in 2013, and here we are in 2025. This has never happened before or since, although there was a hack on the Kindle version of my first book. It went away for a day. Someone out there got rid of the Kindle for a day, and it came back, and they didn't understand what happened. But again, all 5 books, and no low nut books were hurt in the making of this hack. older texts weren't bothered.
Take Posner's book down, case closed.
Yeah, none of them. They were fine. You can still get them in your fine bookstore on Amazon.
Jeez, man.
It's doing that time. So again, harassed at work, not once or twice. Things taken down from the internet. And I know the specific person who was harassing me says like, "Oh, Vince is a paranoid paradise." No. It's a specific person who was intimately involved with Gerald Blaine and Clint Hill and knew them for many years. In fact, the guy could just say this: he was in the military intelligence and maybe in Congress. He was also in the post office for years too. But the thing is, this was really bizarre. Is he also this guy who was harassed me before the show down at work? Seemed to be able to track my every movement online. Like, how the hell did he know I just visited this site and this site? How did he know I was at work and not at work? It was creepy. So the bottom line, when people think, oh, it's 60 some years later, get a life. There's nothing. It's old news. It's not too. No, Clint Hill just died in February, but you still have Gerald Blaine and Paul Lannis making the rounds, and you got these former Secret Service agents traveling the world, making millions. Before people say that's hyperbole, Vince. No, it isn't. All their books were New York Times bestsellers. They all got movie right money for it as well. The movie of Clint Hill is still in the works, by the way, even though the Kennedy detail book was acted by me. It's
that Agent 9?
Yeah, Agent number 9. And Paul Lannis has also come out with a documentary on his book. It's just amazing. But what it is the whole thing is Clint Hill and Gerald Blaine, when I said that 22-page letter, freaked them out. They were fly fishing in Colorado. They were long retired, never thought about writing a book. They didn't even want to talk to authors or do anything about it, And it freaked him out, and he circled the wagons and came on their books. Now, I'm not having delusions of grandeur to the extreme. Now, the other books that Clint Hill came out with afterwards were about Jackie and this, that, and the other. But even his first book, which is a really nice book, other than a few pages, when he gets the assassination, it's comical, and I address it in here. It's almost like he's trying to tie up some of the loose ends I talk about in Gerald Blaine's fictitious meeting. I said, how come Roy Kellerman wasn't at this meeting on November 25th? Then all of a sudden, Kellerman doesn't say a word, but he's standing beside Floyd Boring when Floyd Boring's telling Clint Hill, yeah, the boss doesn't want you guys ride in the back of the car. The thing that doesn't make any sense is Floyd Boring was added to me on 2 occasions, 3 if you count his letter. Kennedy was a very nice man. No, never wore us out the car. And I made sure there's no wiggle room. I said, you sure in Tampa he didn't? Oh, no, not at all. And again, guys, it wasn't until these films and photos were released, a lot of them in the last 5 to 15 years, had they been released. If we were doing this interview back in 2005, I wouldn't have had hardly a leg to stand on. A lot of the documents were released. A lot of the films and photos were not. I didn't even speak to these guys yet, or some of them just spoke to. So I really wouldn't have enough of a – see, it's a sad thing. A lot of the stuff only came out decades later. It's not like when we're investigating the ammunition and, the theories, but the single bullet theory. Well, that was all readily available from day one. But so much of the stuff was handicapped for these guys not being available, not going under oath, films and photos not being made available. But the whole bottom line is the blame the victim thing is totally bunk. Kennedy had nothing to do with it. And if you want,
you ruffled some real feathers, Vince, with that. I mean, it really, to me, it sounds like you were the first person who, in like a coherent, chronological way, put everything together. What happened that day in Dallas with respects to Secret Service, and you just started finding so many things where they're tripping over themselves with their testimony, with this guy said this, no, he never said that. We were ordered to do this, no, the orders came from him. And I think you scared the shit No, I know you did. You definitely scared the shit out of all those guys because they weren't counting on someone like you putting it all together and then presenting it to them.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And again, it's a little old man to me. I work for a living. I'm not in this for the money. The money I made is breaking even as I'm working Monday through Friday. I'm working stiff Monday through Friday. I'm not, you know what really makes me mad? This whole thing, pro-conspiracy people are in for the money.
You're profiting. You're profiting off a tragedy.
You know what cracks me up? Gerald Posner made a mint. Vince Bugliosi, even though his book sort of stiffed, made a mint, and they had movie rights. People forget about the movie rights of these major publishers. Clint Hill and Gerald Blaine travel the freaking world. They made millions off their books, not including a squelch movie deal. He still got the money, advance money, even the movie went under, and Clint Hill still got the advance money. They were traveling in Revelo, Italy, and all these other exotic places. Lived in Belvedere, California. I mean, you just think about this. Clint Hill's first book alone sold 300,000 hardcover books. Cha-ching.
$30-$40 a pop.
Yeah, and you factor in he wrote 3 more books on top of it, and movie advances, plural, too, and all the TV appearances and documentaries where they had to pay him. Oh, by the way, a friend of mine tried to get him to lecture his local community. Nothing less than $25,000 fee, or he wouldn't do it.
Holy shit.
Yeah. So little old B is working for a living, who's barely broken even with my books.
Right.
And he had the audacity to say people like me are in for the money. It makes me want to puke. Where the people really making the money are the Oswald did it loans and blaming JFK.
Yeah, the vanguards of the official story bullshit. And the Myers and people who were in concert who've helped with the cover-up for 62 years.
Yeah, and Eric and Mike, I always say, hey, there wouldn't have been any book if Gerald Bain, even if tragically, if he would have been lying through his teeth, if he would have said, oh, President Kennedy did want us on the back of the car, there'd be no book. There'd be no revelation. There'd be like, well, it's kind of like in JFK movie. Well, it's time to move on with our lives, gentlemen. There's plenty of other local crimes to prosecute. It's kind of like that's what would have happened to me. It'd have been like, well, I've reached the end of my road. In fact, sadly, when I look back at that 1991 Third Decade Conference, my first major conference appearance, other than the people that have sadly passed away, I'd say 98% of that audience faded away after a year or two. It didn't never heard of them anymore, because if you don't have anything original to go with this, kind of like Harry Livingstone told me bluntly when I wrote to him right before that conference, is, Vince, unless you have something original, don't waste your time with this. You're just going to run yourself into the ground. And that's when I realized, when I gave my little presentation in Fredonia, it was all based on secondary sources, albeit the Warren Commission Committee. I put it all together in a chronology at that time. It's only 25. And, but all these researchers were blown away. George Michael Weaver, author, Harry Livingstone, Robert Connor. And they were saying, boy, I guess that's why they call the secret service secret. Vince, I never noticed that Greer looks back twice. I'm like, wait a minute. You've seen Superfilm so many times, and you guys didn't know that Bill Greer turned around twice. And I got home so jazzed by this thing. And keep in mind, you have to do any primary research yet. Well, Cyril Wecht from my area, Pittsburgh, he called me out of the blues. I heard you were a big hit in Fredonia. And I'm like, oh, this is pinch me. I'm dreaming. Cyril Wecht calling. This is unbelievable. I'm like, yeah, sir, it's an honor to talk to you. I'm making him laugh. Some of the documentaries I have on VHS at the time, video. Well, he says to me, have you ever thought about contacting these men? I said, never really thought of it. Maybe you should think about doing something like that. He planted the inspiration. He gave me no address or phone number because he didn't know the agents where they lived. But he lit a spark under my butt to say, damn it, I'm on a roll here. I got to do something about it. And it was after that conference and the Dr. Weck call that inspired me to go full gangster, full bust on the Secret Service to find them. And thank God I did, because, again, that Gerald Bain, if I waited 6 months, he's dead.
Yeah. What year was that, Vince, that you started contacting them?
Yeah, it was basically fall of '91 on. And basically what it boils down to is if I never would have contacted the number one agent, Gerald Bain, BEHN, people would forever say, oh, Vince, but you speak to the number one guy. What did the number one guy have to say? And I got him on audio tape. Floyd Boring is number 2 assistant. I got him on audio tape, and I got him on in letter. I got other guys on audio. I got other guys in writing. So I always knew I had to do that to a certain extent, because you know what? People would always be scared to, well, how do we know he really said that? You know how people are. So you've always got to back
up your sources. Yeah.
Good.
Oh, I was going to say, what's really interesting, though, back to Clint Hill, is I think even in 64, when he testified to the commission, talks about, I looked in and I saw a hole in the back, right rear of his head. And Landis as well testifies to this. So these Secret Service agents who had literally the best vantage point, saw what happened, it was fresh in their minds, are saying this, but yet still will say I believe it was only one shooter, while also contradicting the Warren Commission at the same time in Arlen Specter's single bullet theory.
Right. You hit the nail on the head. Yeah, it's exactly Clint Hill, Warren Commission testimony, and his Secret Service report talks about the back of the head's gone. There's a wound in the back, not the back of the neck, the back. Okay. Then you have Paul Landis, 2 Secret Service reports saying the shot came from the front. When he was contacted by the High Select Committee, it's buried in a footnote in the final report. He confirmed the veracity of the Secret Service report because he never actually testified at the Warren Commission. He submitted reports. Well,
Landis never testified?
No, he never testified. He does that. He does have the Secret Service reports in Volume 18, so that's good. It's in writing.
He was interviewed in the 80s, so that's why it's funny when it's called The Final Witness, because he's talked before.
Oh, he's talked somewhere. That's another thing too. I debunk in my book. That's one of the other than Clint Hill and Gerald Blaine's book. I also debunk Paul Landis' book.
They've talked
to people all the time. Hey, these guys talked to William Manchester. They were doing documentaries. Like Paul Landis in 2003 is on a DVD about presidents' families. That got years before. Like, what's he talking about? He's on A&E Network talking about the presidents. That, but they want to do for sales the final witness, the final this. No one's ever. They're breaking their silence and all that.
There's got to be a hook. There's got to be 1 or 2 hooks, or like you said, there's got to be something to sell a book. And same with Bill Frazier talking about how he saw a guy with a rifle outside of the depository. He never said that before his book came out.
See, that's it. It's like the Paul Landis. What a tremendous omission. This omission's got to be one of the most horrible omissions ever. He comes out with this book, turned out to be a massive bestseller because of the hype about the bullet. We'll get to it in a second. In his book, he couldn't fit one sentence in his book talking about, oh, yeah, I wrote 2 Secret Service reports saying a shot came from the front. His readers don't even know he wrote 2 Secret Service reports saying a shot came from the front. He doesn't even mention it. And he mentions nothing about a bullet. He was interviewed, several times between the 60s. I think he skipped the 70s and the 80s, 90s, and into the millennium for the Kennedy Detail. He's on the Kennedy Detail documentary that was on Discovery Channel several times. It's on a DVD, in fact. And he never mentions the bullet business. What he does mention is finding a fragment, but we know about those fragments. He just makes it. That's why it was never newsworthy to anybody. He found a fragment. That's the end of it. But what he did is, I think what happened was there was a gentleman by the name of Gary Laux, who ironically died early 2023, the year Paul Landis' book came out. He claims, again, this might be convoluted for your listeners, he claimed during the 50th anniversary that C.M. Kinney, the driver of the follow-up car, Secret Service agent who passed away in 1997, told him that, I found a bullet. It was like pristine on the limousine and whatnot. And I think what happened with Paul Landis is he saw that Gary Laux just died. Hey, Sam Kinney's dead. I'm going to run with this story because he never mentioned it before. And the thing is, to somebody who's not a researcher, probably read that book and go, well, it's like some of the reviews on the Amazon. It's a tremendous bait and switch. Everyone's excited about this book, and there's only a few pages about Dallas. The rest is about his boring Secret Service career, which was short-lived, only like 5 years. But more importantly, he hasn't explained. You only have to be a seasoned researcher to understand the tremendous importance of the bullet that he supposedly found, if it was even true. But a John Q. citizen is going to be like, what does this mean? How's this against official history? I don't get it. How are we going
to tie that in? Right.
Yeah.
So that plays into this question from Varen. I wonder if the 2023 Paul Landis revelation about the magic bullet was a red herring. Did he really reveal anything groundbreaking? Thanks for the question, Varen.
I would say my short answer is no. He reveals nothing, although he does. I got to thank him for one little tidbit in his book. There is one little one. My short answer would be to the gentleman, no, he doesn't. But I could stray and say there's one little detail. It's interesting. I discovered this in 1991. People probably see it on YouTube. The famous black and white WFAA ABC footage of the motorcade beginning and agents running with the limousine. It turned out to be Don Lawton. And he raised his hand 3 times in disgust. Well, in his book, exactly, Paul Landis talks about that and says that I always find that incident peculiar because Don Lawton, we had plenty of security at the airport. He was needed desperately in the motorcade because we were short-staffed with men and whatnot. We needed him. And he thought that was peculiar, and he would love to see the original notes of Advance Agent Winston Lawson if he was really scheduled to be at the airport. And we tie that in with the fact that what's a little-known detail about that video, again, found in 1991, this black and white ABC footage of the Love Field where the motorcade goes off. And again, the agent goes, I guess, 3 times. Well, Paul Landis is standing on the running board of the follow-up car. He throws his leg over on the fob car and sits down and leaves a space there, presumably for Don Lawton to hop on the car, which he never does. And it's only after like a couple blocks does Paul Landis get back out on the side of the running board. He left it open there, presumably for Don Lawton. Well, Don Lawton, later on, when I spoke to him in 1995, he says, we've always had regrets. Who knows? If only they had let the agents on the back of the car. He didn't say anything about Kennedy or on the car. Well, he died in 2012, and he told a friend of his, it was an obscure Idaho article, says that I should have been there. I should have been on the back of the car. And Don Lawton rode on the back of the car for that 28-mile motorcade in Tampa. He rode it in the Chicago trip in March of 63 I mentioned earlier. Okay, but the bottom line is there's this one little paragraph indebted to Paul Landis in that book. But other than that, it's a big waste of time. It was like a pamphlet's worth of information, and he wrote a book. Here the correction of Mike and Eric. The first frontispiece page of his book says, I want to thank Clint Hill for supporting my book. Meantime, Clint Hill came out against this book on NBC and said that he just totally I don't know why 60 years later, this book, I laughed. I said, wait a minute, he doesn't support your book at all. And there was a reunion of the surviving Kennedy detail era agents. He wasn't invited. Everybody else still living went to Clint Hill's estate in what was it called?
Virginia,
Belvedere, California. I almost forgot.
Except for Landis.
And Landis and we were good friends up to 2010 because there's photos of them arm in arm at Secret Service conventions and Dealey Plaza. And they shot
on the grassy knoll together. You have it on your Facebook.
Yeah, I have it in my book.
That's an epic
photo.
The bottom
line is he didn't support it at all. So you know what it is? I think what happened was Paul Landis, he looks like he could be 68, but he's 88. I think he figured, hey, Clint Hill made a killing, and so did Gerald Blaine on their books. I'm going to write a book. I have nothing new to say. Right. I'm going to say this fragment was a bullet.
Was Clint Hill on the car up until Houston Street? Because he was protecting Jackie.
Yeah,
was he actually like riding on the back there until Houston, right?
Yeah, off and on 4 different times on Main Street. He took it on his own. Again, that debunks the whole idea about Kennedy was on the car. There's some sort of presidential admonition on staying in the car. Well, Clint, why did you ride on the back of the car 4 times? That kind of kills the idea there's an order. Well, he picked up on that because in his book, 5 Presidents, the 3rd book, he made up something that he never said before. He said that Kennedy looked back at him several times during the motorcade. Like, wait, Clint. There's never been a photo or film showing
footage
JFK looking back at you, and his bad back would have prevented it anyway. I looked everywhere. There's nothing. He never mentioned it in the 1st or 2nd book or in Kennedy detail or any testimony, anything before. And all of a sudden, I think what it is he read the word. I'll give you an example, Eric and Mike, of his revisionism. From 1963 to like 2016, he was adamant the back of the head was off. When he started to see the rumblings about, do you know what that means, Clinton? The son of a gun started to move it to the side. When he was interviewed in 2020, he started to say the wound was here. But for decades, he said the wound was behind here. I think what happened, some of the Parkland doctors didn't say anything. I think he started to realize the ramifications of what they're saying. They wasn't no part of it. Oh, it's Oswald act alone. Oh, you're saying
that's why it's kind of hard. It's kind of hard to believe that Paul Landis never looked at it or thought about it until 2013 or whatever it is that he said that he look. Hey, I can look. You and none of us here know what those guys went through or the PTSD that they had. And one of your book is even called Survivor's Guilt. And you even acknowledge, of course, obviously you had your dust ups with Clint Hill, but the dude at least tried to do something and was the one who
he did try to do something.
He responded. This was his experience. He was drinking till the early hours with other agents. I want to get into that in a little bit. And of course, in that movie, In the Line of Fire, does that victim blaming as well.
John Malkovich
and Clint Eastwood.
And Clint Eastwood it's even on the record. There's no doubt. Clint Hill was even admitted that was loosely based on him. The whole is ironic.
Of course it was. Of course it was.
But the movie, even though it was a Hollywood entertaining movie, fabulous movie, was a Secret Service sponsored movie. There was like 5 or 6 former agents, including Jerry Parr, the head of Reagan's detail, pushed him to the limousine on March 31st, 1981. Well, more important than all that, out of nowhere in the movie says you wanted to station agents on his back bumpers, and he refused. You know why I think he refused? He had a death wish. So what that does to millions of theater goers, they go, oh,
plants it in their mind.
He had it coming, So it's. I can't tell you how I still.
It's Inception. They trot that out on every anniversary, Vince. It's on the History Channel. You see it in the news, and where do you actually attribute the quote about I want those Ivy League boys off the bumper, or I don't want those Charlotte. What's the quote? I don't want those Ivy League charlatans.
Yeah, get those Ivy League charlatans off the back of the car. I $64 million question from the source, Gerald Blaine, who later on wrote the Kennedy detail. Here's a story about that. Floyd Boring was not interviewed for Manchester's book. This might seem bizarre to believe, but Gerald Blaine is even on video saying Floyd Boring wasn't interviewed for the death of the president. Floyd Boring told me he wasn't interviewed for it. More importantly, he denied that ever happened in Tampa. The Kennedy never ordered him off the car. Oh, that's not true. He never interfered. Very nice man, very cooperative. So I'm thinking, oh my God, wait a minute now. Because on the other hand, that's why it might be convoluted for your listeners. It's a convoluted story because Floyd Boring is used by the Secret Service in 1964, only because the Warren Commission asked, to create this ruse that Kennedy did indeed order them off the car in Tampa, which was used as the excuse why they weren't on the back of the car 4 days later in Dallas. Okay. But here's what happened. When I looked at, William Manchester's book, I was very curious by his sources. And he listed them all alphabetically at the back. Well, there's no interview with Floyd Boring, but there's an interview from Gerald Blaine. So my suspicion went up like, oh my God. I contacted Wesleyan University during the research of my first book, Survivors Guild. Real nice gentleman, the archivist there. I said, you do me a favor without me actually having to go there physically. Can you search the archives for what's available? I said, well, some of these interviews aren't going to be available to the year 2067, 2067. That's another story in itself. The ARB couldn't even pry them out. Manchester died, and he said all those records are under seal.
Well, that's up to Caroline Kennedy.
Yeah, we should deal with it. Hold the thought, Mike. Here's the $64 million question. There's no interview with Floyd Boring. He confirmed that he was not interested. Oh, yeah, Floyd Boring himself said I was never interviewed for that book. Gerald Blaine was. The transcript is missing. He called me back and said, Vince, I don't know what to tell you. The transcript is missing. The transcript's missing for Gerald Blaine. What? Could it be that in 2005, when I nailed Gerald Blaine down about being interviewed? Oh, by the way, Gerald Blaine confirmed what the book says. He was interviewed in 1965. So I think what happened, make it very short they can read the book for the details. Make it very short and sweet for your listeners. Here's what I think happened. Death of the President was this massive best-selling book, basically an Oswald did book, writ large. And they blamed Kennedy. They said in Tampa, Kennedy turned around and said, get those Ivy League charlatans on the back of the car. They attributed to Floyd Boring. People didn't do their homework and realize, well, Floyd Boring was interviewed. Gerald Blaine was the actual source of the quote. When I confronted Gerald Blaine about it, not only did he confess that he was interviewed by Manchester's source notes agree, he said that quote came from the guys. I don't remember who said it, but the guys, someone in the guys said it. Then 5 years later, his book says the message was loud and clear on my walkie-talkie. So I got pissed when I read that. Wait a minute now. He's lying. He told me something totally different. So that's when I called the Wesleyan archivist. He called me back and said, I was so excited to get the transcript of Gerald Blaine. Oh, this is going to be good. You know it. He's in there. He's caught dead. The transcript's missing.
That's wild.
Why would it be missing? And in case you're wondering, Vince's other ones missing. None of the other ones I asked for, they're not missing. It's either they're available, and I got several photocopies, or they're not released at all. His is missing, not missing for public. It's missing, and I would not put it past him at all. Now, this part is sadly speculation because I can't prove this part in the court of law. I actually think Gerald Blaine or someone knew him, went to Wesleyan University and make sure that transcript wasn't available. Hightailed it out of with it because I think it was going to be the smoking gun. Even if somebody had this says, oh, Vince, now you're bargaining on true. You can't prove that. Okay, let's throw that out for the record if we're in the court of law. Okay, let's just go with what we know. We know that there's this quote attributed to Floyd Boring that Floyd Boring says is not true. He never said that. And you realize, wait a minute, the book, who said it? Gerald Blaine is interviewed. In case you're wondering, the other agents had nothing to do with the Tampa trip. They were interviewed for the book, so they couldn't have been the source. The only one who was on the Tampa trip that was interviewed was Gerald Blaine. And Gerald Blaine knew enough about this incident to make it a big deal in the Kennedy detail. I'm like, wait. How come you didn't know anything about it, but now you're making such a big deal in your book? See what it is. He used it as a tool, like he did with Death of the President. It created tremendous damage, Eric and Mike, because so many newspapers and books picked up on that. And
they attributed it, yeah.
4 days before Dallas didn't want the agents on the car, so he ordered them off the car, and then he threw it. I think it is Ivy League charlatans doesn't even make sense. A friend of mine even said it's quoted in the book, and Kennedy wouldn't say anything like Ivy League charlatans. doesn't make any sense, that kind of lingo. He went to Harvard. Why would he call him?
He was Ivy League too. Yeah, I mean,
yeah, it doesn't make any sense. So I think what it was he threw that out there. He was trying to say something that sounded like Kennedy and backfired. He didn't think there'd be somebody that would ever investigate the truth of that. So
it's narrative building, Vince. It's more narrative building, and it just eventually it calcifies and solidifies, and that just becomes and they have to spend all your time chipping away at it. That's what I do,
Mike. Mike and Eric. The two things I fight. I don't want to exaggerate. It feels like a weekly basis. We'll just say a monthly basis. I fight two things all the time with people. Don't get me wrong. I've turned on a lot of people to my research, and people realize, oh, bravo, Vince. It's good to blame the victim. Myth is no longer around. I still get people doing two things to me, though. Hey, Vince, I read this book, and I understand Kennedy didn't want the top on. He didn't want the agents on the car. I have to fight that all the time. Then the other thing I get is, I see Greer. He shot the president. I'm like,
oh man.
Dude, we hear that every week, Vince. Every week, Vince. Hear it every freaking week, man.
Oh, I know. You know what it is? It's
TikTok. It's on TikTok.
Oh, big time.
That's Brill Cream.
Yeah, it's Brill Cream. It's Roy Kellerman's head, especially poor quality copies of Zapruder film. It looks like a cartoon gun. It's actually his head. In pristine copies of Zapruder film, there's no gun.
Yeah,
and obviously, then you'd have to have Jackie, the Connollys, everybody else covering up for it.
Jackie.
Turn and blow them away. Yeah.
Well, that one, Vince, and then the one about the Secret Service agent accidentally shot him because that one, and then
I can tell you
mentioned in your book the one where he's like, I almost shot Johnson. That lady who said that too, man. So this stuff brings people off into other tangents, and it takes away the focus from the real stuff.
Well, it is. I can say something real quick. You're going to be shocked. There's actually one kernel, I say big kernel of truth to the whole thing. Not that Hickey shot the president. Hickey did not. That's bull. The agent in the fall car actually tripped up the AR-15.
And those guys who wrote that book even knew that was BS, and they still published it and went ahead with it.
What happened was Howard Donahue, the originator of this entire theory of Hickey shooting the president, was a strong supporter of the government. He believed Oswald alone. There was no conspiracy, but he found ballistic evidence it wasn't Oswald. But in his mind, if you read his book Mortal Aware, it later became that real special, what was that called? That Ian McLaren, I forget the name of it right now. But anyway, Smoking Gun or something. Well, anyway, the bottom line is, you had Howard Donahue's government-sponsored mind. There's no way the government could have been involved. There's no way there's a conspiracy. Oswald did it. But he's finding ballistic evidence that couldn't come from Oswald. So that's the good news of his theory. Even though Hickey didn't shoot the president, this guy's coming clean and saying, ballistic evidence. There's no way that the headshot came from Oswald's rifle. But see what it is because he couldn't. It's kind of like all the witnesses that said that the back of the head's gone, the single bullet theory is crap, but Oswald acted alone. They can't understand Governor Connolly for decades, the single bullet theory is not true. We have Clint Hill, Paul Lance, Dave Powers. The list goes on of people that says there was no missed shot. The single bullet theory doesn't make sense. It's not true. But then they can't put it together that you can't have it like that. It's either there's a conspiracy if there's single bullet theory isn't true. You can't have the back. Like Sam Kinney, it's funny. Sam Kinney told me the back of the head blew off. He was watching Kennedy's head. He had to maintain a 5-foot distance. He's driving the fob car. He saw the back of the head come. I said, that's the part. I said, you sure it's the back of the head? He goes, oh, couldn't have been any other part. I saw that part come off. In fact, I got something that I told you that no one's going to know about. I tried to tell the Today Show his only TV appearance, but he found the piece of the back of the head lying in the C-130 transport plane on the limousine that was on the C-130 transport plane heading back to Washington, D.C. So I had that piece in my hand. It was like clean as a pot. It was just, there was no blood or nothing on it. It was like a big flower pot, clean as a pin. And he said he put a foam patch into Dr. Berkeley when they landed in Washington, D.C. Whatever Dr. Berkeley did with it, I don't know. But I tried to nail it down. It sure wasn't on the side of the head. It was no. It couldn't have been anywhere else but the back of the head. But he believed Oswald was the only shooter. See what I mean?
Right. So he told you that fact, not understanding the significance of it in the larger context.
Yeah, that the only way for that to have been blown out by that, it had to have been from in front of Kennedy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So some of these guys don't understand. Like with Paul Landis, he doesn't tell his readers a shot comes from the front and his best-selling Final Witness. That's a hell of an omission. It's not like a minor detail. That's a huge omission to not tell you.
I mean, look at his. I don't want to call him a handler, but look at the guy who co-wrote the book with him. What's his background? Right, kind of similar to Lisa McClubbin in a lot of ways, I think. But another correspondence you had, Vince, and this is very relevant for this week, was with Dr. Don Curtis in 1998, who was a young 26-year-old attending, I don't want to say attending physician because it was more, his background was dentistry, but he was trained in the same stuff doctors are. And he was in trauma room 1, and he actually cut President Kennedy's pants in trauma room 1. So talk about your correspondence with him and what he said to you and what his testimony this week was.
Yeah, I'll just mention, just briefly go through this. What happened was I did my first book. Now, keep on for your listeners. My book was a self-published affair for Survivors Guild for years, from basically 1993 until it was published above board in 2013 by Trine Day. Well, soon after that, well, not soon after, 1998, I began a quest to find all the surviving medical people from Parkland Hospital, Bethesda, Naval Hospital, and all points in between. Anything they had to say about the wounds, because I had the 26 volumes at the time. And it's right before they hit the internet. We're on the internet for free, but I had the 26 volumes. It's so frustrating. Like, you had to search for what the wounds. I wanted to see every time Dr. McClellan mentioned the wounds, Dr. Perry, et cetera, and all the obscure attending physicians, nurses. I wanted to know what the story was about the wounds. The overwhelming majority of them said the back of the head was gone, and this was an interesting. But more importantly, one of the ones I contacted was Dr. Don Curtis in 1998. He talks about how the back of the head is gone. It was like a tangential wound. Pretty amazing, because there were some people coming out in the comments on YouTube saying, "Was this Johnny come lately? Only coming out in 2025?" I was like, no, he was interviewed by the Warren Commission. It's not his fault the Warren Commission didn't ask him for more details, but he was interviewed by the Warren Commission, number one. He was referred to by other doctors, number two. And number three, 1998, he wrote to me from his hospital, working hospital, and told me about the wounds. And he's joins the course, the one that says the back of the head was gone. So pretty amazing. It's great to see him on video like that, because to my knowledge, I don't think he was ever on video before. So that's pretty cool. Oh, another thing too, in 1998, one of his very obscure colleagues, William Zedlitz, he was mentioned in the Warren Commission volumes during testimony of Dr. White, but was never interviewed himself. I found him in 1998, first time ever on the record. Back of the head's gone. So it's another one. So they were just
telling you what they saw. And in his testimony this last week on the Congresswoman Luna's panel, he's got to be 87, 88 years old now.
Yeah, he looks good for his age too, but
he's still moving pretty well, and he still seems pretty lucid. And he just said he basically debunked that long-standing thing that Gerald Posner said. Well, the doctors in Parkland didn't look. They didn't turn Kennedy around. They didn't see the other wounds. They clearly saw a hole in the back of his head. Come on.
Exactly.
That is so disingenuous for debunkers and for Gerald Posner and for lone nut people who promote that to say that.
You know that, but you had the House Select Committee lying, and even Donald Purdy of the House Select Committee admitted it was an egregious lie. When it came out in the 90s, they uncovered the House Select Committee documents. There was a statement in the House Select Committee report that really bummed a lot of people out for quite a few years. It said, in contrast to the Parkland doctor's statements, the people of Bethesda had diametrically opposite views. None of them supported the Parkland doctors. What turned out, oh my God, the FBI agents both said the back of the head was gone. You had Roy Kellerman, Bill Greer. You had other Bethesda people. You had Gerald Custer, Ed Reed. The list goes on. So the House Select Committee lied. And when House Select Committee's investigator, Andrew Purdy, I call him Don Purdy. It is Don Purdy. Anyway, when he was interviewed at the COPA conference in Washington, D.C., he's on the record saying it's egregious, it's wrong, it was a lie. I'd like to know who wrote that. I certainly don't think I had anything do that statement. But for years, people read the House Select Committee report, just like Gerald Blaine's book and all the lies in his books, and say, "Oh, well, see, look, you Parkland doctors were mistaken. All these Bethesda people, but turn out the
gaslighting.
Them. It's sad. Yeah. It really is. So
it is. I mean, Bethesda was. Lyndon Johnson had really great connections to Bethesda as a Navy guy, and he became president. As you point out, he something very significant happened on Air Force One there. He became the president, so he was in charge of everything. So before we let you go, a couple things we wanted to touch on, and we mentioned this earlier. Sure. Eric, I know, Eric, you had a question for Vince about who was guarding him when the Secret Service agents were out drinking into the wee hours.
Well, yeah, the night before they were out drinking, and I think I maybe heard you say this, Vince, or someone else, that JFK was left with a bunch of firefighters.
Yeah.
At his hotel. Is that real?
Firemen. Yeah, Fort Worth firemen, because the other agents were either sleeping, they were off the detail, they weren't guarding the Hotel Texas hallways, and like a whole bunch of them. I want to say all told, like 20 plus agents, 9 of them agreed on the record they drank. I think it was a limited hangout because a couple newsmen, one famously said they were bombed, but one of them spoke to me and said, it's in my first book, Survivors, goes, I can definitely attest to the agents and their heavy drinking and partying that night. So I think 9 of them went on the records and they couldn't, their conscience was bombed. They couldn't lie, but at the same time, they probably couldn't admit instead of like 5 or 10 beers, it became 1 beer or just a scotch and soda. But drinking while on travel status is grounds for removal from the agency. And these agents were guarding the president. Like, give you an example, ironically, history repeated itself. In 2012, President Obama, Cartagena, Colombia, 9 agents drank and caroused. They were fired, demoted, just vilified. Well, 9 agents drank the night before. Kennedy's killed, including 4 on the follow-up car. Clint Hill, Jack Reddy, Paul Landis, and Glenn Bennett. None of the men were punished in any way whatsoever, and yet Kennedy's killed. One of them, Clint Hill, gets 2 promotions and a medal, and he's like, became a famous superstar of all his books and everything. And again, none of these guys were punished in any way whatsoever, and they lost the president. But again, this is back before Woodward and Bernstein, before the internet, before paparazzi as we know it today, before people question their government. Oh, these poor Secret Service agents. Oh, Betty, it's a shame, isn't it? They lie, but people aren't thinking the way they are now. Now they'd be like, heads are going to roll. Son of a gun, you're going to prison for your negligence. We're going to take away your pension. Your family's going to be villaged. You're going to be like the Scarlet Letter. But back then, it was like they actually gave a medal to Clint Hill. It's like they didn't give a medal in World War II for almost saving your buddy. Give an example. Art Godfrey, tremendously decorated World War II veteran, one of the good guys in the Secret Service. He was on the Texas trip, one of the shift leaders, one of the many agents who told me President Kennedy never ordered him off the car and whatnot. He saved a couple of his men during World War II. He got the Bronze Star, the Silver Star, a whole bunch of medals for, didn't brag about it, that's the way he was. But he didn't get a medal for, one of the men under your charge died, but you tried to do something. Clint Hill got a medal for trying to do something. If you want to really be brutally honest, you look at the Zapruder film and much more film than the other films of those, Clint Hill got to the car when it was all over and done with. And Jackie actually gets in and out of the car of her own volition. They actually never touch. She gets in and out of the car of her own volition. He covers her after it's all over, and especially if people out there believe Oswald alone, it was really over. So Clint Hill literally got a medal for attempting. Meantime, he was one of the agents that drank the night before. It's just ridiculous. It's
a lot of people don't know that. So they literally left their post and they left Kennedy without anybody armed. They left him with a bunch of unarmed firemen.
Yep, unarmed firemen
in Dallas the night before Dealey Plaza.
Yep,
to go to Fort Worth.
And they had to report for duty at 8 a.m. Paul Landis even admitted he didn't get back to his room until 5:30 a.m. And he admitted in his book he didn't even get any sleep. I said that's probably the reason why they were wearing sunglasses. They were hungover. In fact, Paul Landis makes a bizarre
probably still drunk.
Well, Paul Landis makes a bizarre statement in his Secret Service report. He says when they were in Love Field, he turned to Sam King and says, "Which car's the follow-up car?" I'm starting to think, was he serious or was that literally like, which car is the Secret Service follow-up car, man? Like, it makes me think, was he drunk? Were these guys drunk? But the bottom line is it's grounds for removal. When Chief James Raleigh testified at the Warren Commission, Earl Warren, his greatest moment, he gave it to Chief Raleigh. Don't you think the president would have been better off if these men would have been well-rested and not drinking and beating at clubs? Like, Gerald Blaine in Kennedy book says, we were so understaffed. We never got enough sleep. Yet you didn't. You had an opportunity to sleep the night before the assassination, you bastard, and yet all these guys are drinking. Oh, Gerald Blaine's one of the 20 agents that were not drinking. He claimed he didn't drink, though. He was one of the agents that claimed, I visited these places, but I did not drink alcoholic beverage. We have their word to whether that part's true or not. But 9 admitted it, including 4. And the thing is sad is Clint Hill and Jack Reddy were the closest to Kennedy. They were feet away. So imagine if they would do their job. Imagine if they weren't ordered away from the car, one of the handhold holding the rails.
And none of the Johnson detail were out drinking. Is that true?
None of them. They were all bedded down for the night.
Sharp.
Yep.
Do you believe the word about Johnson ducking before the first shot? What do you think of that whole thing?
I think that's all bull. That's all legend. Yeah, because here's the story. Not only did you have Senator Yarborough and Dave Powers saying it didn't happen, Rufus Youngblood, the agent who supposedly vaulted over the backseat onto Johnson, basically with tongue-in-cheek, kind of like smirk on his face is on video a couple of times. I don't think it happened as fast as Lyndon Johnson thinks it did. I think it's his way of kind of castedly admitting I don't think it happened, but it creates just like with Lyndon Johnson making up the story, but how he stole that election, and back in was it 1948 or whatever,
48 when he was going to Congress.
Right. Well, I think it created a sexy story, like a Shakespearean tale. So, my agent, I'm going to do whatever is the best for this boy. He became especially in charge of the White House detail later, and an assistant director in that. And it was a good old Southern boy, Rufus Youngblood. But I don't think if he did, it was way late. I don't think he did jump over.
Senator Yarbrough even talks about smelling gunpowder at ground level, though, which is very interesting.
Several of them did. In fact, Rufus Youngblood, in a letter to me, even admitted that, he smelled gunpowder, too. How could the smell of gunpowder get down there so close? If Oswald had to load, he's up on the 6th floor, way up there.
Downwind.
Gunpowder get down there that quick that they're smelling at street level. Yeah. So.
And finally, Vince, you have talked to so many. How many Secret Service agents have you talked to? You must know the exact number.
I think
or close to it.
It's just under 80. If you include family members, it's over 80.
So 80, and you've talked to a good portion of the Kennedy detail who were actually there that day, and some who weren't in Dallas.
Right.
How many of them told you that they actually believed there was a conspiracy and there was a plot, and what we're told is bullshit?
Gerald O'Rourke, who was on the Texas trip, he adamantly believes in conspiracy. Sam Kinney, although he thought Oswald was the only shooter, was adamant there was a conspiracy that the back of the head was gone. Maurice Martineau was a former White House detail agent, obviously worked protecting Kennedy from 61 to 63 when he came to Chicago, believes in conspiracy. Abraham Bolden was adamant that's Ford, believes there's a conspiracy. Marty Underwood was the Democratic National Committee advance man who worked hand in glove with the Secret Service, was on the Texas trip. He believed it was a conspiracy. Then you get into those ones where, like, Lem Johns believed the shot came from the front. Paul Landis did. Forrest Sorrells believed the shot came from the front. So you have that kind of nexus too. And then some of the agents talk about the wounds and don't realize what that means. So, but yeah, that's at least 4 that actually told me they believe there was a conspiracy. Yeah. Oh, and a couple of them, Frank Yeager and Walt Coughlin, had conservative viewpoints. They think there was a conspiracy. The mafia did it, and that's what was behind Oswald. But it's still a conspiracy. Yeah. Still,
it discounts the official narrative, and they would know.
The mafia was involved, but at a certain level, it had
at a certain level.
Yeah, they didn't change the parade route.
Yeah, and all that, and changing all the security for Kennedy and whatnot. Yeah.
And the autopsy, they weren't at Bethesda. The mob was not at Bethesda. That was brass. There was military brass at Bethesda.
If you want very quickly, if you still got time, I could
we got time, Vince.
We got time. I could just tell you a list of things that happened that shouldn't have happened, vice versa, as you compare Tampa 4 days before to Dallas. Thing I'll say, Tampa, agents rode in the back of the car. They didn't in Dallas. The military aide rode in the front seat between the driver and the agent in charge. He was asked for the first time not to ride there in Dallas, said it was unusual, Normally, many motorcycles beside the cars, they were in Tampa. He gets to Dallas. There's 4 behind the rear wheels, making it meaningless. 28-mile motorcade in Tampa 4 days before. All multi-story building rooftops were guarded with men heavily guarded, armed to the teeth. In fact, Russell Groover, the head of the motorcycle team, told me, every multi-story building had men armed to the teeth, and they had military police on the ground for ranch-style ranch-style dwellings, not dressing, dwellings. So an eye-level dwellings, they'd be able to see, that. You had that. Then you had the sheriff's department working with the local police, lined streets facing the crowd. You had them in the crowds themselves. You had the fast speed in Tampa as well. You had 6 pages of threats they found in Kennedy's life. They found a big goose egg in Dallas. Roy Kellerman even testified to the Warren Commission that was unusual. I spoke to Abraham Bolden. He also said that was unusual. And then you had a flatbed truck that normally rode in front of the limousine taking professional still and motion pictures. In fact,
the press truck.
Right. You wouldn't need Abraham Zapruder and all that. Well, they weren't there. And Dallas Morning News photographer Tom Dillard said normally press photographers' flatbed truck rode in front of the limousine, which is absolutely true. I find this is very true. Many of the trips had it. And it was canceled. They were rode in Chevrolet convertibles. They couldn't even see the assassination occurred. It totally pulled them out of the picture.
Right.
Then you had the sheriff's department by Roger Craig famously said they were told to not participate in any way in the security of this motorcade. Yet it was normal for the sheriff's department to work hand in glove with the Secret Service.
Yeah,
and
local.
Also, it was normal to have a police and or detective's car in the motorcade, as they just had in Florida, in New York, and Chicago. Yet Will Fritz and Dallas Police Chief Jesse Curry wanted a police car there behind the Secret Service follow car. The Secret Service nixed the idea. They didn't want Will Fritz's men there. They didn't want the Dallas police car there. So there you go. That's why Secret Service protection was terrible.
Bottom line there, Vince, you only need one or two really well-placed people for all those things to not happen in Dallas, right? And who are a couple of names in your mind that would be the prime suspects to ensure none of that was in place?
I'm glad we got a little more time because I can tell you, I got three suspects.
Plenty of time.
We got a
little more time? Okay, good.
Yeah.
Just let me know if we can even go.
We're cooking. You're cooking, Vince. Are you kidding me?
We got up to 9 o'clock, so we're good. We're good. Hey, okay. Number one, there's three of them suspects. One of them is Floyd Boring, the number 2 agent. He was the planner of the Texas trip. Turns out Jim Bishop's book, The Day Kennedy Was Shot, even talks about how the planning of the Texas trip was in the capable hands of Floyd Boring. Floyd Boring admitted to the Truman Library only in the late 80s. The JFK Library, it only came out in the late 1990s, that he was on the planning of all President Kennedy's trips. So even though he wasn't physically there in Dallas, he was there in Florida, but he was planning a Texas trip. And what makes him really suspicious to me is he's on the record, official record, I should say, of telling the agents not to ride in the back of the car for the Texas trip. Yet he's telling me there's no truth to that. It's very, very bizarre because the film and photo record and all the other testimony supports him. Yet there's the Secret Service reports and the testimony of Clint Hill to the Warren Commission's Arnold Inspector that lays the blame at Floyd Boring. Arnold Inspector even said Floyd. So Floyd Boring was the one who told you and the other agents not to ride in the car, back of the car. He says, yes, I believe that's true, sir. He did. So you had Floyd Boring also involved in the limiting of motorcycles, but rooftop security, anything that happened in Dallas, good, bad, or indifferent, or all the other trips.
It had to go through Boring.
Had to go through Boring. And Gerald Bain, the head of the White House detail, took his first full vacation during that Florida, the Texas trip era. I learned that years before it was in Gerald Blaine and Clint Hill's books. It's good to get the confirmation in their books. It was the first time we ever took a vacation all those years in the Secret Service. Yeah, wow. Sam Kinney even told me that was his first full vacation. He was in the Secret Service from 1939 to 1965. And he accrued all this annual leave, and other than a day here and there, maybe for Christmas, something like that, if that, he never took like a week off, nothing. And he took that time off, and Floyd Boring was left in charge in a third stringer. I always make the analogy. It's a guy going to the Super Bowl. You have Tom Brady in the Super Bowl. Hey, Tom, I'm going to sit you down. We're going to have Jimmy Garoppolo, one of the third stringers. Roy Kellerman's third stringer. You're going to take it. Now, here's the second suspect, Emory Roberts.
Wild.
Isn't it crazy? Emory Roberts, since it's not a gaggle of men, we're talking 3 people. Second one's Emory Roberts was the shift leader. He was the commander of the other agents of the follow-up car. Not only did he order 2 agents away from the car at Love Field at the beginning of the motorcade, Don Lawton and Henry Ribka, who were jogging with the limousine. He does that. Well, when they get to Elm Street, the assassination begins. He orders the men not to move. And how this came about was by a total accident. I found this out. And Harry Livingstone's book, High Treason, I'm complaining things, must be getting late or something. But Harry Livingstone's book, High Treason, it's mentioned that Emory Roberts ordered the men not to move. Tantalizing, but there's no source on how did Harry say it. So when I interviewed Sam Kinney, who sat a foot away from Emory Roberts in the follow-up car, Emory Roberts, by the way, died in 1973. Pretty young. He was only in his 50s, kind of weird. But so I said, is this true? Fully expecting Sam Kinney. He said, no, that's not true. I don't know why he's thinking that. He's probably thinking blah, blah, blah. He goes, exactly right. Like, huh? He goes, exactly right. And I'm involved in that too because I had to slow the car down. I said, well, why did he order the men not to move? He said, well, Clint Hill left the car that time and he was afraid the other agents might get run over and stuff. And I'm like, I ran this by other agents and said that you don't do that. You don't care about your safety and safety of the other agents. You're there to protect the president. That's like cover and evacuate. Like when the agents guarded Reagan, they didn't care. One agent went like this. And Harvey took a bullet in his stomach. Could have been fatal. He didn't care. He had to do his duty. And
he made himself big.
Yeah, we're ordered. So now we're 2 orders away from Love Field. Emory Roberts orders the agents not to move when the shooting began. He gets to Parkland Hospital. 4 authors have noted Emory Roberts' quick switch in allegiance, including Kenny O'Donnell and Dave Powers, who rode the follow-up car, Jesse Curry in his book, it came out in 1969, notes Emory Roberts' quick switch in allegiance. Well, when they get to Parkland Hospital, William Manchester even notes that Roberts turned to Roy Kellerman, his superior, and says, "You stay with Kennedy. We're going with Johnson." Emory Roberts was solely responsible for the decision to take Johnson to Air Force One, when Air Force Two was just as good of a plane. That was the plane he rode in on. And Kenny O'Donnell was adamant that he had no discussion with Lyndon Johnson. He said, "No, there's no truth. I had nothing to do with Lyndon Johnson taking over Air Force One. It was Emory Roberts' decision." Before you can catch your breath and all that, Emory Roberts has the sole distinction, 1865 to 2025. This has never happened until Emory Roberts, before or since. He was still an active agent. He became the appointment secretary to Lyndon Johnson. Not did I get that in an interview, again, with Sam Kinney. It got corroboration. It took years to get corroboration. Not that I doubted Sam, everything he told me was good as gold. Well, in like 2008 to 2010, I spent a lot of money at newspaperarchives.com getting these articles that would only be available if you paid money to get them. And it's New York Times and all these obscure places. And it talks about how the press in 1965 were wondering, why is this Secret Service agent sitting at the desk that used to be occupied by Dave Powers? He's greeting the Japanese ambassador and all these other people. He was still a Secret Service agent up to the early Nixon days, and he's working as appointment secretary to Johnson. And here's the crazy thing. When Johnson said his farewell to the White House and the Secret Service detail, is a transcript of it. He goes, "Oh, and Emory Roberts, he can't be here tonight. He says goodbye to me every night and good morning to me every morning." So it's like, whoa, he really thought that how he picked him out of all the agents that could by Emory Roberts. So again, when you put it in the context of him,
he was rewarded.
Ordering agents away Love Field, ordering the men not to move, switching to Johnson. And you see what he became. It's grist for the mill for a lot of things. And he's the one who hamstrung Clint Hill and all the other agents. Their drinking the night before didn't help. But when you have the commander of the other agents telling
you that to it.
You add that to it. And the third big suspect for me, I got other ones too, but the three big ones, I'd say, the other one's Bill Greer, the driver of the limousine. And even people like Gerald Posner and Vincent Bugliosi on record saying the success of the assassination, now they believe Oswald act alone, the success of the assassination is Bill Greer, because he would hit the gas. It's the sequence of events is crucial. What happens is, again, I told you in 1991 when I showed the Zapruder film, I was showing slow motion to all these people on video.
They were going about 12 miles an hour, and they slowed down a little bit. Vince,
they slowed down.
How fast was the motor? Was the actual limo going?
It was going close to 20 to 30 miles an hour when they were on Main Street and before. When it gets to Dealey Plaza, because of the turns, it slows down to 11 miles an hour, maybe even lower down to 8 miles an hour when the assassination is occurring.
It's like a sitting duck.
So it's like the speed of pulling out of your parking space. If you time, I said, that's my speed when I pull out of a parking space. It's that slow. Well, here's the thing. Bill Greer, first shot or shots ring out. He's properly trained. He had the proper training. So none of this stuff he wasn't trained. He drove Presidents Truman, Eisenhower, and Kennedy many times before November 22nd. That's the bottom line. He was also a private chauffeur for some other people. But first shot or shots ring out. He looks back. He's staring right at Kennedy. He denied ever seeing Kennedy. Roy Kellerman sitting next to him and says, "Get out of line. We've been hit." He grabs a radio microphone. In that instance, Bill Greer turns around a second time, staring at Kennedy, and only when the fatal headshot makes his mark does he turn around, hit the gas. Roy Kellerman, it's buried in a footnote in Death of a President. Roy Kellerman was interviewed by William Manchester, and he says in there, Greer then looked in the back of the car. Maybe he didn't believe me. So you get all that. And when by the time Bill Greer talks to the FBI agents, he's now denying seeing Kennedy. He's now denying that he looked back once, let alone twice. He only caught a glimpse of Governor Connolly quickly. And he's telling the Warren Commission, "I hit the gas. There was probably the second shot." Like, no, you didn't. You hit the gas after the fatal shot was gone. He withheld Kennedy's clothing during the autopsy, vital, the suit coat and the shirt and everything like that. Okay. And the thing that's really amazing to me is he died in 1985. Okay. I spoke to his son, Richard, in 1991. Having a nice conversation, some controversial things, but pretty much straightforward stuff. And I said, "What did your father think of President Kennedy?" When dead. I'm like, I know he heard me. I went on to other things. It was very awkward. He said, "Tell me or what?" So I go on to other things. I go back to, "Sir, if you don't mind, what did your father think of President Kennedy?" He goes, "Well, we're Methodists and JFK was Catholic." I'm like, okay. It took me years to realize the true significance of that, because in 2013 from Ireland, the Irish Times newspaper contacted me because they just got a hold of my book somehow, some way. And they said, one of our honored sons from Ireland, William Greer, he came to America at the age of 18. Says, do you realize that he was a member of the Order of the Orange? Him and his father and his grandfather. Like, what? Yeah, the Order of the Orange. They're highly anti-Catholic and they're pro-Methodist and pro-Protestant. I'm like, wait. Now that really makes that statement by Richard Loom large. You would think he'd tell a stranger on the phone, oh yeah, he loved President Kennedy. President Kennedy loved him. He said first time after the answer goes, well, we're Methodist. JFK was Catholic. Makes you think just like some of the agents that held it against Kennedy for his private life that came out on ABC in 1997. And one of them was Tim McIntyre, wrote the follow-up car. Did Bill Greer have some animosity toward Kennedy? He admitted to being a chauffeur in Boston, and he was on the estate of Henry Cabot Lodge, Kennedy's two-time political opponent and the bastard of Saigon later on. So you have all that. He had to know about the rumors of bootlegging and all that stuff with Joe Kennedy Sr. and all that. Well, what's really crazy is, talk about another major discovery of mine. I say all this, but it was just me in the wilderness. It was like a fluke. I mentioned you guys before the book by George McNally, former Secret Service agent, head of the White House Communication Agency, called A Million Miles of Presidents. Well, in that book, out of nowhere, in the sequence of the Kennedy years, it's getting close to the assassination. He goes, one of Kennedy's drivers, Thomas Shipman, died suddenly. And I was like, whoa. That's fascinating. A Secret Service agent died suddenly. What's this all about? It took years to ferret it out. What it boils down to is everybody talks about these mystery deaths after the assassination. This is the first and only mystery death before the assassination. It was a month before the assassination, October 16th. Thomas Shipman was one of Kennedy's drivers. He dies of an alleged heart attack after passing an annual physical at Camp David. The only person that ever died at Camp David, the only Kennedy agent to die during that time. There's an honor roll. Of 1,000 men and women who come to the Secret Service, 38 have died in the line of duty. Thomas Shipman's one of them. Thomas Shipman was buried 2 days later. No toxicology tests were done. I contacted his family. What I mentioned earlier, don't ever ask a question you know the answer to. These people could have blew me out of the water. Said, Vince, get a life. He had a heart ailment. I wasn't prepared for that. If they would have said that, I'd be like, scratch one thing down the drain because they had a heart ailment, get a life. How dare you? You know what they all said to me? They questioned me for years. They couldn't believe he just passed the annual physical, how he died suddenly. They questioned his death. Before I could catch my breath on this, turns out, and I got the family tree through Ancestry.com. Somebody said it's true. So this was not added on for like effect because these people didn't want one dime. They're still in obscurity in Colorado. They didn't want any money or nothing.
They want the truth.
They had family in Dallas. And Thomas Shipman, who had drove Kennedy up to late September, was looking forward to the Texas trip, specifically Dallas, because there was family there. And now this part might be Monday morning quarterbacking, but his surviving family also believes that Kennedy would have lived if Thomas Shipman was a driver. But I have a tendency to agree with him. But they both, his daughter and his first cousin, both said to me, we always were, it's the number one thing in the family. I always thought it was very suspicious how he died, the manner of his death, the manner of
timing.
And the thing is crazy. Dr. Berkeley was involved in this. Laura Shipman, his daughter, told me, Dr. Berkeley told us he took care of everything. I'm like, whoa, that could be taken a lot of different interpretation. But the bottom line is it took him out of the pool. There was 4 drivers, the president. Bill Greer, Thomas Shipman, Morgan Guys was head of they call it the White House Garage Detail with Sam Kinney. Admittedly, Sam Kinney mostly drove the follow-up car, but he sometimes did drive Kennedy. So the lottery was really between Thomas Shipman and Bill Greer. I have a decent amount of photos and films of Thomas Shipman driving Kennedy as well. So it's not just Greer all the time that people think. Well, with Shipman out of the way and Morgan Geist getting older and basically retiring to being the head of the garage detail and staying behind on trips, with Kinney driving the follow-up car, that leaves Greer as the driver. And again, when you think about this guy, there's no country doctor adage, I say, if they can't see you were stabbed or shot, heart attack. And he's buried 2 days later. Toxicology tests, these celebrities die. It takes weeks or months. They take, that celebrity, Thomas Jones, who died 6 months ago, it turns out it was barbiturate intoxication. The toxicology test came through. He's buried 48 hours later. Give me a freaking break. Somebody didn't want to. And the thing that's really crazy about this is that this name was totally unknown to Mr. Secret Service expert in 1999. It took years to ferret out information about him. None of the major newspapers mentioned his death. What's really bizarre to me, I can't wrap my head around even to this day, JFK, Jackie, Pierre Salinger, nobody mentioned a thing about his death. Yet 10 years later, when another Secret Service agent, Cliff Dietrich, one of Richard Nixon's agents who died in a helicopter crash, President Nixon had a conference speaking about him. Tricia Nixon and the one daughter went to the funeral. There was a big play about his death. And yet 10 years before, Kennedy was very kind-hearted. Pierre Salinger was very kind-hearted. When Patrick died, Pierre was almost in tears. Patrick Kennedy, the baby, died in 63.
Yeah, they're thoughtful people.
Yeah, and they don't mention a thing about Thomas Shipman. What makes it really even more bizarre, on that date of Shipman's death, there's a famous photo of Kennedy by the Oval Office and John Johns peering out of the little trap door underneath. And on that day, Jackie is with Clint Hill getting ready to go to Greece and eventually Aristotle Onassis. So it was a big play media day. And they didn't mention about Thomas Shipman, one of his drivers died. It wasn't some guy in Spokane, Washington. It was a member of the White House detail, for God's sake.
Yeah, and Shipman had been with Kennedy since he was inaugurated, right?
So he was on the inauguration detail, literally.
Okay, he was always one of his drivers for all of Kennedy's presidency up until the middle of October.
And again, he dies
a month before Dallas.
The only guy to die at Camp David, the only agent to die from the Kennedy era before the assassination. Yeah, guys died years later.
He was, like you said, he was healthy. He had a clean bill of health.
How old was he, Vince, when he died?
He was 51.
Okay.
And, and that's pretty damn.
I mean, those guys are in shape.
And here's the thing about, like, somebody told me, like, about Secret Service drivers. Oh, Dan Emmett. Dan Emmett drove George W. Bush, George Sr., and Bill Clinton. He drove all those agents. He said, you know what, all those presidents. He says, you have to be extra fit to drive a president, because if something happens to you, there goes the president. There goes the dignitaries. There goes people in the crowd that you
everyone in the car. Yeah.
You have to be extra fit and fiddle. You can have a little paunch if you're in a field office. You can have a little paunch if you hardly do any motorcade detail. If you're driving the president, I know no one's infallible. Some things pass through. I understand that. But what are the odds the month before the assassination, guy was looking forward to driving Kennedy, and it creates an opportunity for Bill Greer. And Bill Greer did such a horrible job on Elm Street.
Wasn't he kind of older, though? Wasn't Greer kind of cryptic at that point even?
Yeah. He was 54. But he had served more time in the Secret Service. When he goes back to the FDR days, he was on the yacht with FDR, and he drove Truman. And Shipman was from like the Eisenhower era on.
And the crazy thing too, Vince, and you've posted about this. Other motorcades have gone through Dealey Plaza, and they stayed on Main Street, and they went straight. They didn't. Exactly. They intentionally didn't take that turn.
Yeah, Governor Connolly. Yeah, you're right. Governor Connolly, during his Warren Commission testimony, said straight down Main Street was the normal parade route. Here's really ironic. Wait till you hear this. Everybody knows about.
And agents would be on the car going 30, 40 miles an hour too, right?
Oh, yeah. Many times there was agents on the back of the car going at a very fast clip. Again, Bob Lilly, I mentioned him before, as they were on South America trip. They were going to speeds of 50 miles per hour hanging on the back of the car. I have some blurry photos from the Tampa trip. It's obvious they're going from a fast clip because their suits like hanging out like a cape. And they're hanging on the back car. You can tell them you can just tell from the photos. These are some blurry. They're going fast. They're trucking. And there's Chuck Savoral and Don Lawton holding on to the back of the car. So you have that kind of protection. But here's the thing about Main Street. Now you have, the normal parade route. It's September 11th, 1960. Everybody talk about September 11th, 2001. September 11th, 1960. Then Senator John F. Kennedy and then Senator Lyndon Johnson, they were campaigning for president, went straight down Main Street the other way. FDR, 1936, Forrest Sorrells was part of the security. They went straight down Main Street the other way. The only other time Lyndon Johnson, JFK were ever in a motorcade together, November 21st to 22nd, 1963, the Texas trip, and you have him right a couple cars behind another open vehicle. That is such a no-no. In fact, Belford Lawson, the attorney for the House Select Committee, said that this is the first time in U.S. history that the president and vice president were ever in an open motorcade together. And I've never found anything to debunk that, because all my research, everything I've ever seen, I've never seen them together in a motorcade ever. And Sam Kinney, Gerald Blaine of Kennedy Detail fame, and Abraham Bolden are all on the record saying it was very unusual for them to be together. And Rufus Youngblood said something funny in his book he wrote in 1973. He said that from a security standpoint, it was a no-no to ever have the president and vice president together in the same plane, same car, the same this, that. I'm thinking, hello, what about the same open-air motorcade? How about that? And yet they're there,
Right.
and what happens. And it's just crazy. Even for people who believe Oswald Act alone, the minority people out there, if they would have been guarding the building rooftops, and sometimes a helicopter was used, and even when it wasn't used, they had. Oh, the day before, wait to hear this. In 2013, on the National Geographic Channel, they had a great. It's on DVD. It's called JFK: The Final Hours. It is a color clip of the San Antonio motorcade from the vantage point of a helicopter, police helicopter. They're filming the damn motorcade. And the next day, imagine if they would have been filming the motorcade in Dealey Plaza or a helicopter. If there was a shooter or shooters, it would have saw a helicopter. And I got other trips that's documented. There was a helicopter in Duluth, in Nashville, Tennessee, in Germany, in Ireland. I mean, the list goes on. But to be fair, I didn't find a gaggle of trips that had a helicopter, but a handful, still a handful. But building rooftops were normally guarded. And I get this. There's 2 major Secret Service books written before the assassination, written with the help of Chief Inspector Michael Trina, who wrote the Secret Service manual, by the way. If anybody would know, he would know. He talks about whenever a president is in a parade, building rooftops are guarded. Now, it could have been a little hyperbole. Maybe he meant multi-story buildings. No, literally every single building, because what Russell Groover told me was it was only multi-story building rooftops and ranch dwellings, ranch-style one-story buildings. Those were covered because it was not at eye level with military or police or agents. So on that, but anything that's like higher, then they'll have those building rooftops guarded and whatnot. So because I know, like at Pittsburgh, in fact, at the Pittsburgh Press, my hometown, Pittsburgh, PA, when Kennedy came to Pittsburgh around October 62, he said, what happened in Dallas never would have happened here. We had all our sharpshooters on the roof. This is 1962. Said there never would have been an Oswald in Pittsburgh, but like, whoa. So again, people have a tendency to think, oh, a lot of those security measures only happened because of the assassination.
Right.
Oh my God.
I think Dallas was uniquely positioned as a city to have the assassination because they fucking hated him down there. I mean, there was so much hatred for Kennedy down there, and the plotters got him down there. They got Kennedy down there.
And you know what, Mike? Think about it this way too. They found 6 pages of suspects, like Enrique Laca, Pedro Diaz-Lanz, and these other anti-Castro Cubans in Tampa. He gets to Dallas, a city. JFK even said, we're heading to nut country now. He even said that last night, or 21st, would have been a hell of a night to assassinate a president. He had Senator William Fulbright, Pierre Salinger, Evelyn Lincoln, others warning Kennedy not to go to Dallas. There's the John Birch Society, there's the Wanted for Treason posters, there's the Welcome Kennedy to Dallas. And yet they find not one threat. No one's there. It would be like a President Obama going to Mississippi. Oh, nobody here wants to kill you, sir. There's no threat for you. You're safe.
You can't say that Dallas doesn't love you.
Yeah, really. And yet,
Nellie Connolly, right?
Yeah, exactly. And Roy Kellerman, to his eternal credit again, that's why I have a tendency to not think of him as harshly, because he always said there's got to be more than 3 shots, gentlemen. A flurry of shells came to the car. The back of the head was gone. He didn't see how the single bullet theory worked. He said he found it unusual. They found no threats to Kennedy in Dallas. But what it is they found no threats. Could that have been the cover story for less security? Oh, we didn't find any threats, so he didn't get any extra protection. But then the thing, that's why nothing's black and white. When Roy Kellerman was it wasn't under oath. When he was speaking to Seibert and O'Neill the night of the autopsy, they infamously got a quote from him saying the advanced security measures in Dallas were the most stringent and thorough ever invoked for a president. If anything, it was the exact opposite. Roy Kellerman saying
look what happened to Adlai Stevenson when he went. He got spit on, and he had crowds descending upon him.
Yeah, so he got hit with a placard over his head.
Yeah,
all that. So, Senator Fulbright famously said, "Sir, Mr. President, being President Kennedy, I wouldn't go to Dallas. Don't you go." And then Marty Underwood, a Democratic National Committee man, went up to Kennedy. I interviewed Marty Underwood in 1992. And he said that Kennedy said, Marty, you worry about me too much. And Senator Henry Gonzalez, San Antonio, the day before in San Antonio, said that the Secret Service told me they took care of everything. Henry, JFK talking to Gonzalez, there's nothing to worry about. And there's a famous article by Jim Lehrer saying, Secret Service, sure, always secure. So you had all that as the backdrop. Oh, and then the other thing, really bizarre, truly bizarre. The morning at the breakfast in Fort Worth, as they're waiting for JFK and Jackie to come out, the narrator out of nowhere starts talking about the assassination of President McKinley, on, and how everyone was shocked. And believe it or not, there was actually Secret Service there. And, who would have knew that this normal day would turn out to be anything but ordinary? And bizarre. What is the hell is this kind of small talk, morbid small talk is this? Then he breaks, here's Jacqueline Kennedy and the president. Like, wait. So people say, they go, what is that about? But that's the backdrop to everything, It's just bizarre. So that's why everybody has a hard time believing Oswald acted alone in the context of the prior threats, prior plots, in the lack of security. Kennedy, I could accept Kennedy's death more if it would have happened in Tampa, because security was so good. Well, then you know what? It was his day. It was meant to be. Because my God, look at the agents in the back car. They had security rooftops. They had motorcycles going at a fast rate of speed. They had
helicopters.
Helicopter, all that. And he gets the exact opposite. And he gets to Dealey Plaza, and it's even like former agents in their memoirs even said,
it's like a ghost town. By the time he gets on to Houston and Elm, it's like a ghost town.
There's a crowd down Main Street. He gets to Houston, especially Elm. There's just a smattering of people. And then other than one professional still photographer, Ike Alkins, there's no professional people. When he gets to San Diego and these other towns, and also foreign trips, there's usually a live television feed right in front filming, or actually videotaping, black and white video. He gets in. There's no flatbed truck, so if it wasn't for Abraham Zapruder grabbing his camera that morning when the secretary said, go get your camera, Mr. Z, there would be no Zapruder film. It'd be a fluke. And so that's what I mean. You had this. It happens right there. It doesn't happen on Main Street anywhere else. It happens right there. Come on, So.
Well, whoever did shoot from the depository, and I don't believe it was Oswald. They didn't shoot when he was on Houston because everybody would be looking up at them. That's one thing I do have to agree with what people like Posner say, like, when everyone's like, well, why didn't they just shoot him when he was coming down Houston before he got on the Elm? Well, he would have everybody looking up, and you'd be able to spot who it was.
Everybody was looking at it because everyone was heading right towards that window. The window's getting bigger and bigger, and the building's getting bigger. They're right there. I do agree with that part. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
So that's what I think. Well, anyways, we're at 9:00, and Vince, you've been so generous with your time, and
no problem. My pleasure, man.
I love rap with you, man. You're one of our favorite guests, and you got to come back on sooner than 2 years.
I know, really.
This was your 6th book?
This one's number 7. It's coming out officially May 29th, so 6 days, although it's available for pre-order. So, yeah.
We have it here too, folks. It's Mr. Vince Palamara,
and we included a link to your YouTube page. Yep, there are all those books right there. The link to the YouTube page is in the description too. So everyone, give him a follow, a subscribe. The work you do is it's essential, Vince. It's opened my eyes to so many things that I wouldn't have ever thought about with the Secret Service, with the plot, the security, the nuts and bolts, and everything. So
I appreciate it, guys. Thanks a lot. Yeah,
really appreciate all you do.
All right. Sounds good. Appreciate it. Yeah.
All right. Well, folks, thanks for listening to another episode of Jackman Radio, and please subscribe to our channel, like us all on social media, and if you support what we do, consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/Jackman Radio. And we, again, thank you for tuning in, and we will be back again soon with more podcasts. Have a great night.